Ah, baby llama don't have no time for drama.
Your advent was etched in sunlight. From one sapling, a forest rises.
Well, aren't you interesting?
Oh, there it goes.
And what is it you require?
Punching pie.
Very well then.
Meow. Got him. I don't think that was the thing. Hmm. What the what? Random. Oh, there's a barrier. Feel sleepy. Okay. Oakley dokley. Hmm. Hmm. Strange loud. I don't know what to do. Hmm. Very confusing. Hmm. Where is it? Am I supposed to like do something with it? Hmm. Hmm. Okay. That's confusing. Hmm.
The moth cocoons in Shimmerbow are growing out of control. Can you help collect them from the treetops?
Drust forces are testing our defenses at the Grove of Awakening. Show them the might of the Wild Hunt.
Hmm.
Devourers continue to encroach upon the forest. Slay the beasts and use their anima to seal the rifts before we are overrun.
Yeah, I'm already bored. Alright.
It is a particularly beautiful. Much has been asked. More will be required.
Probably will make it so. Fuck it.
The gardens are overrun.
No franchise has ever been more transparent about what they are and why they exist. The creators knew what the job was and they executed. Copy the Ninja Turtles. In the process, they made a place for themselves in the history books, creating a video game, but not just any video game, the hardest video game ever. Hi, I'm Dan Larson, and this is the history of Battletoads. Thank you to Hunt-A-Killer for sponsoring this video. Click the link in the description and use code GALAXYMEDIA to get $10 off your purchase today. Hunt-A-Killer games are different from your standard tabletop gaming experience. They're a hard-boiled adventure that challenges you and your friends to solve a mystery with the clues provided in the box. A video game franchise created by Rare in 1991, it is intentionally a copy of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles with a predictable degree of generational loss. 3 frogs with the names Rash, Zitz, and Pimple make the 4 turtle names Leonardo, Donatello, Raphael, and Michelangelo look like high art. The Battletoads are 3 anthropomorphic frog dudes named Rash, Zitz, and Pimple. They fight evil by manipulating the shape of their own limbs, focusing all of their power into a single smash hit strike. A hand becomes an axe, a foot becomes a giant boot, an entire Battletoad becomes a wrecking ball. Hello! The Battletoads used to be human. In fact, they were the playtesters of the original Battletoads game at Psychone Corporation. See, in the world of Battletoads was a cutting-edge virtual reality simulator that was programmed by Silas Volkmeyer at the direction of Psychone executive Alexei Vacuus. Morgan, Dave, and George were the 3 game testers who would utilize the VR system to play as the Battletoads fighting evil forces around the galaxy, saving countless worlds and racking up huge high scores. But Silas Volkmeyer wanted to be more than just a programmer. He was tired of the Battletoads getting all the glory. He wanted to be a Battletoad. So instead of just playing the game himself, he took the next most reasonable approach and attempted to kill Morgan, Dave, and George by ramping up the difficulty level of the game itself. Turns out that Volkmeyer wasn't just writing some amazing code. He had unknowingly tapped into another dimension. His creation of a portal between worlds combined with the power of the evil Dark Queen who crossed over into our world changed the game forever. Because that alternate dimension is where the Battletoads were manifesting to defeat evil every time the game was played. And that meant that the Battletoads were a real serious threat to her evil rule. The 3 game testers are tricked into using the game system, but this time the Dark Queen has infected it with a computer virus. When they arrive in the other world, they are greeted by Volkmeyer and the Dark Queen, who explain that the gamers are now permanently genetically bonded with their Battletoad skins, and they can never return home. The Dark Queen deploys her forces. However, just as the Battletoads are about to be overwhelmed, they are saved by Professor T. Bird, who transports them to safety and joins them in their fight to defeat the Dark Queen, to save the world, to get home, and to do it all as Zitz, Rash, and Pimple, the Battletoads. The Nintendo Entertainment System made its debut in 1983 in Japan as the Family Computer, or Famicom. It arrived in the US in 1985 with a new look and a new name. By 1987, it was the biggest thing on the planet for kids, for adults, for anyone interested in home gaming. 1983 also saw the publication of the first issue of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, created by Kevin Eastman and Peter Laird. By 1987, they had one of the most popular comics, one of the best-selling toy lines, and a hit cartoon. They were also a pretty big deal. In 1989, the Turtles came to home video gaming on the Nintendo Entertainment System, and the following year they had a hit feature film that cranked up the already dominant Turtles merch to oversaturation levels. Merch across the spectrum of licensing, from here to Dimension X. Since the mid-'80s, when the Ninja Turtles first arrived, the Turtles inspired a lot of copycats. Imitators trying to get even a fraction of that sweet mutant ooze, that sewer full of green paper. Just a little taste of whatever it was that made those turtles so popular and so lucrative. The video game developer Rare was founded in 1985 under the name Ultimate Play the Game. Based in Leicestershire, England, they found success creating games for the ZX Spectrum. Looking to reach a larger market, Ultimate Play the Game reverse engineered a Nintendo Entertainment System to figure out how to make games for it, which caught the attention of Nintendo, who were so impressed that they granted an unlimited budget to begin development of games for the NES. The company, now called Rare, created new technologies, new gaming formats, new visual and gameplay experiences that could be utilized across genres. In 1991, the 8-bit era was on the verge of expiration. The TurboGrafx-16 and Sega Genesis both launched in 1989. The Super NES launched in Japan in 1990 and was due to hit the US in 91, but Rare continued to produce as many games for the NES as the studio could manage, capitalizing on a window of proficiency and mastery that would inevitably close. Since 1985, Rare had witnessed the rise of the Ninja Turtles licensing empire and had been forced to compete with it. So they turned to a strategy that had worked in the past and attempted to reverse engineer the Turtles' success. Even if your goal is to straight up copy the competition, you have to be at least a little clever about how you do it. Frogs instead of turtles, 3 instead of 4, virtual reality constructs instead of mutants. It's fine. It's fine. Heroes named after skin conditions that kids could relate to instead of Renaissance artists that no one had ever heard of. Ooh, Artburn. The goal was to run behind, but parallel to the Turtles, even if they never achieved the same level of success. At least it would give Rare an outlet to supplement income with Battletoads-related merchandising. First, they needed a game. That started with the familiar side-scrolling beat-em-up play mechanics of other popular games like Ninja Turtles and Double Dragon. From there, they developed a plan to keep gamers perpetually on their toes, forcing them to adapt to an evolving game that only promises surprises, from beat-em-up to racing to rappelling to climbing. In May of 1991, a month before Battletoads launched, issue 24 of Nintendo Power magazine featured 8 pages dedicated to a Battletoads origin story comic. That was followed by issue 25 in June that dedicated nearly a third of the magazine to Battletoads, including maps, character profiles, and even more comics.
It's just video game review! Okay, last week Harley and I reviewed Ultra Enviroman. Whack to the curb. It has got to go. So today, we're gonna take a look at Battletoads. Rocky! That it is, I mean, they got Psycho Pigs and Turbo Thwacking. And with kick fighting, surfing, babe saving, how can you go wrong? Your kid's a freak for Battletoads and these other games from Trade West, Nintendo Entertainment, or Game Boy systems required.
The 90s were a different time.
In June of 1991, the story picks up after the events of the Nintendo Power magazine comics. Aboard the spaceship Vulture, Professor T-Bird, Rash, Zitz, and Pimple are making sure that Princess Angelica is safely transported to a meeting with her father, the Emperor. Pimple and Princess Angelica are bored and decide to take Pimple's space car out for a drive, which gives the Dark Queen the opportunity she was looking for. After trailing the Vulture in her ship, the Gargantua, she captures Angelica, Pimple, and the space car. The Dark Queen steals away to the planet Ragnarok's world. Zitz and Rash, the 2 remaining Battletoads, along with Professor T-Bird, must use all of their gnarly Super Frog skills to fight their way through the Dark Queen's forces and save Pimple and Princess Angelica.
All right, once again, time to hit the road with a load of toads. Now get a load of these toads, because Pimple's in big trouble. It's Rash and Zitz to the rescue as we roll into this game.
Battletoads was rightfully promoted as being highly innovative. That means different things to different people. To some, it means visually interesting. To others, it means fast-paced and engaging. To everyone else, very, very difficult. And it wasn't an accident. Rare's designers knew that kids had been playing NES games for years. In the twilight of the system, there should be a high bar set for difficulty. Players shouldn't be able to beat it in a single night sitting. They wanted people to buy the game instead of renting it. That said, there's a line. Too difficult and it crosses into the realm of frustration and abandonment. Many have pushed back on the notion that it is challenging, preferring the label unbalanced. And to a certain extent, the developers recognize these concerns.
Once again, time to hit the road with a load of toads.
Shortly after Battletoads was released in the US, it was released in Japan. The game was given a few tweaks to tone down the absurdity of the difficulty, centering a more enjoyable gaming experience for a larger group of gamers over the precision challenge that appealed to only the most determined minority. Battletoads would also be released on the Sega Mega Drive and Game Gear in 1993, a modified version for the Game Boy in 1993 called Battletoads in Ragnarok's World, the Amiga and Amiga CD32 in 1994, every version taking special care to make it easier and more accessible than the original. With a game in hand, the rest of the licensing push could begin, and the biggest part of that push, with an even greater potential degree of visibility, was an animated series. Series might have been a bit presumptive, though. Battletoads never made it past the single pilot episode.
Because Pimple's in big trouble.
Produced by Deke Animation City, the only episode was aired in the US on Thanksgiving in 1992. The story provides an alternate origin for the Battletoads. This time they are 3 high school kids in Oxnard, California. Morgan, Dave, and George are playing video games at their local convenience store one day. Suddenly, Professor T-Bird and Princess Angelica arrive through a dimensional portal in an attempt to flee from the Dark Queen and her evil forces. T-Bird and Angelica assume that Morgan, Dave, and George are wise, handsome nobles. They are invited to become intergalactic heroes. The 3 immediately sign up, and T-Bird sprays them with genetic essence of the Battletoads, the ancient protectors of the royal family, the most powerful heroes in the history of the universe, who were all killed in the line of duty. Nevertheless, the 3 humans are transformed into the Battletoads, complete with smash hit powers and new identities as Rash, Zitz, and Pimple. Unlike the comic and game origin, they can also transform back into human form at will by shouting, "Let's get normal!" and back into Battletoad form by saying, "Let's get warty!" The pilot episode features the Battletoads protecting Angelica and her amulet, but in execution it's mostly just slapstick fighting with anthropomorphic bulls and rats that barely holds on to its own visual style guide as the episode unfolds. The single episode was written by David Wise, not to be confused with David Wise, who wrote the music for the original game. Buena Vista Home Video released it on VHS in 1994. You can watch it on YouTube officially at the Wild Brain Cartoon Superheroes channel. The Battletoads showed up in other games on other systems over the years. Tiger Electronics released an LCD game in 1991. That same year, a spin-off version hit the Game Boy. Battletoads Battle Maniacs was released for the Super Nintendo in 1993, and years later the Sega Master System. Battletoads in Ragnarok's World, as we previously mentioned, for the Game Boy in 1993. One of the most significant and unexpected games that Battletoads appeared in was Battletoads Double Dragon, also known as Battletoads and Double Dragon: The Ultimate Team in 1993. Once again developed by Rare and once again published by Trade West. This game took a popular but past their prime video game fighting duo and paired them with a popular past their prime video game fighting trio for the greatest pre-MCU team-up event. It was also notable for being the first time in the history of the Battletoads franchise that all 3 Toads were playable characters. Developed by Rare with nearly no input or feedback from Technos, the creators of Double Dragon, it was built on the same platform as previous Battletoads games and utilized the variety of gameplay formats that previous Battletoads games had. It eventually found its way to the Mega Drive, the Genesis, the Super NES, and the Game Boy. In 1994, the Battletoads took their antics to the arcade. Another side-scrolling beat-em-up. This time, 3 players can beat 'em up together with the full might of the Battletoads. Cartoonish looking back, but at the time it was a big deal to have more violence than the series has previously seen. Perhaps the natural response to a post-Mortal Kombat world. Battletoads Arcade utilized 3D rendering technology that would later be used for Rare's biggest hits, Donkey Kong Country and Killer Instinct. Rare had finished and intended to release a Game Boy port, but the poor arcade performance resulted in shelving the adaptation. A Super NES version was canceled as well. There was no home version of the arcade game, and the franchise got human for the next quarter century. In 2015, the arcade game was included in a compilation of Rare titles on the Xbox One. 5 years later, the squad would get a legitimate reboot. Battletoads 2020 brings the beat-em-up boys back with a new look and new technology for a whole new generation of gamers. Rare wanted to bring the Battletoads back to take advantage of the advancements in gaming technology in the last 25 years.
Damn it, I dismissed
some of
it.
which they had been personally responsible for. Like so many other reboots, perhaps this would allow them to make the Battletoads game that they imagined all the way back in 1991. Leaning into the cartoon visuals and aesthetic, Battletoads looks like a playable cartoon. Rash, Zitz, and Pimple are back with their shape-shifting powers, escaped from a fantasy simulator bunker for 26 years. The plot takes a left turn as they end up teaming up with the evil Dark Queen to take on a greater threat, evil aliens called the Topians. They're the ones who stole the Dark Queen's power and trapped the Toads in the bunker for 26 years. Everybody's got a foot axe to grind with these guys. Some players liked it, some didn't. It certainly wasn't the franchise relaunch that Rare was hoping for. Like the original game, it didn't quite launch the merchandise empire that the Turtles ruled over. Despite their aspirations to publish comics, make cartoons, sell action figures, stock the shelves of Target and Walmart with kids' hats and shoes and party supplies, there has been very little licensed merchandise over the years. It was never embraced with anything approaching the zeal that the Turtles managed to evoke. Just Toys created bendy figures of each of the Battletoads. Originally sold for around $2, they can be purchased today on eBay for roughly $30 or $40. Modern technology and a healthy customizer community has allowed fans to produce their own minifigures in low quantities and varying qualities. But there's a flicker of hope on the horizon because in July of 2020, Megalopolis Toys announced that they had acquired the license for Battletoads to produce a new line of action figures under their premium DNA Toys branding. Rash, Zitz, and Porka Pig are part of Wave 1. They are 6-inch scale figures with a bunch of accessories and articulation. Also included in Wave 1 is Rat Bones, a 7-inch figure, General Vermin at 12 inches, and General Slaughter is 18 inches tall. Prices range from $39 to $135. Expected delivery as of this video is Q2 2022. Which we are in.
All right, once again, time to hit the road with a load of toads. Now get a load of these toads, because Pimple's in big trouble. It's Rash and Zitz to the rescue as we roll into
They love this clip.
Rare was purchased by Microsoft in 2002 and retains the rights to Battletoads. The Toads have made appearances over the years in other games produced by Rare and or published by Microsoft, like Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts in 2008, Shovel Knight in 2014. Rash was added to Killer Instinct in 2015 as a fully playable character with his own theme, alternate outfits, and lots of homages to the series. An indicator that the Battletoads are still beloved and fans are still longing for their return in some fashion. Whatever the future has in store for the Battletoads, it can't change the past. It can't bring back all the attempts and failures to beat their original NES game. Not just any game, but one of the hardest video games ever. Hoo boy, what a day. Thanks for watching.
Alrighty. Alrighty.
This episode of Internet Today is brought to you by Green Chef.
Hey everyone, we would like to start out today's show by saying thank you to everyone who was able to donate to our fundraiser for the National Network of Abortion Funds. It ends within the next 24 hours or so, but we just want to say how incredible and honestly unbelievable it is that you all came together to raise over $25,000 in 1 week for this cause. And it comes at such a pivotal moment for our country when it comes to the reproductive rights of women. So honestly, blown away. Again, thank you so much. I know we're just a stupid news show on YouTube, but you've all proved once again that communities can come together and help create positive change in this world for others.
Yeah, and we didn't even have to climb any tall buildings.
Exactly. So thank you. And now that we've talked about money well spent, it's time to switch gears and talk about how $45 million went up in smoke in a gamble that we, along with so many others, predicted would fail. Then, the MTV for gamers.
Yeah, so first off, we want to be fair and balanced and say that if anything good came out of Venn, it was the fact that it provided people, many of whom we are acquainted with or know, with a job and money. People in the digital production space had job opportunities at this doomed company during a time where, job opportunities weren't really happening all that much for large swaths of the media landscape. Because Venn launched during the early days of the pandemic.
Yeah, it technically launched before that, but they went live 3 months into the pandemic. So this was at a time where companies were laying people off en masse.
Yeah.
So this was actually like, hey, this is, as a charity,
Yeah.
this works.
At its best, VC money is great at just creating make-work programs for talented people who should be being utilized more, effectively at more important jobs.
Yeah.
But, yeah. So yeah, while it might have been a nightmare to work there, apparently.
Yeah.
And eventually it was doomed from the start, which was pretty clear.
Yeah.
It was an active production that hired people during a time where many were completely hung out to dry. Having said that, it was apparently a nightmare of a company to work at, and that's not just us spitballing.
We'll get into it.
There is information that has come to light. And yeah, apparently Venn suffered from many of the same problems that have affected other digital content factories and game studios alike. Like the one that we worked at. Nepotism, sexism, layoffs resulting in added workload with no extra pay for those who remained. A bitter internal power struggle. Management who clearly had no idea what they were doing.
And
ding,
more
ding,
things,
ding, ding.
yes.
I know all about those things.
Uh-huh.
So this place took all the problems that MCNs had gone through over the course of the previous decade and seemed to just sort of distill it all down into a nice, just compact package where we do all those things. And we do it all in under a year. From rise to fall.
Any percent MCN speedrun.
Yeah, it's impressive.
It is. Now, this information about the behind-the-scenes downfall event comes from a recent article in Input Mag from Tom Caswell, who was able to get under the hood of the company and got statements from what appears to be a lot of the Venn employees to paint a pretty vivid picture of what was going on. Many of the statements seem to mirror the same concerns that people from the outside looking in were raising as well. And most notably, how is a company this big, with this much production and this much talent, going to make money off of Twitch, enough money to cover its budget, let alone become profitable? Having lived through a company that struggled even after whittling down its internal content to just the basics, taking one look at any event's content from the launch immediately conjured flashbacks and red flags.
Yeah, like, oh, this is slick. It looks very expensive. How are you going to pay for it?
Yeah. Yeah. Especially like where your primary platform is Twitch.
Yeah.
Which relies heavily on user subscriptions, where typically you would assume that the users paying the money would see something like a slick production like this and be like, well, why am I going to give money to a corporation, technically, or a big business that is paying for itself? Like, why am I contributing to this?
Twitch also, it rewards organic growth.
Exactly.
Slowly.
And personality.
Building an audience over time.
Yes.
Creating a personal parasocial connection with your audience. Not just springing a, $100 million operation and being like, hey, where is everyone? Look at this. It's, why is no one watching our great shit?
Yeah, and that's the thing, too, is like towards the end of, even at Machinima, it's like, they were trying to do more Twitch and YouTube streaming stuff, and like, that way people can pay to watch it.
They're not gonna
and it's just
do
like,
that.
no one's going to fucking do that. This company's owned by Warner Brothers.
Yeah.
Venn is VC-backed with $45 million. Like, it just didn't make any sense.
So yeah, it also goes without saying that for the most part, the way that people view content and the digital content that is successful is based on personalities. It's not really based on brands. And while there were great personalities on Venn who are great at what they do, those people would have been, and in many cases are, now bigger by themselves than they were at a company that poured millions of dollars into production.
Yes, because you can sit in your room and do a live stream and get unlimited. The sky is the limit to your own success.
Another Machinima thing that always drove me insane. It's just like guys, they don't love Machinima. They love Battlefield Friends. They love
Sark.
They love these individual shows. They don't give a shit about
the name.
Machinima. It's like no one says they're a fan of Unilever. Like, I love Unilever products.
Well, the investors.
I love Dow Chemical.
Yeah.
I love.
Well, that's the thing.
I love Discovery Digital Studios.
So that's
the
the example that we would constantly bring up in our meetings with executives back at Machinima. Was I always brought up no one wears an AMC channel T-shirt. They wear Walking Dead T-shirts. They wear Breaking Bad T-shirts. They don't wear AMC.
No one except for Rob Lowe wears an NFL hat at an NFL game.
I just love the game.
Not taking sides here.
Yeah, it's like someone wearing an umpire hat at a ball game.
But yeah, also one or two people doing a channel or a stream, that's obviously going to be far less of a financial investment, a lot less of a financial stress on an operation than trying to get enough views and sponsors to sustain 100 or more employees. This was a big operation.
Yeah.
A lot of overhead. In addition to that, their production studio was in one of the most expensive areas of the city. Everything was wrong.
They were right next to Google and YouTube.
In Venice?
Playa del Rey, I believe.
Yeah, what are you doing?
Yeah, but it's cool. We can go to the beach on our breaks.
They call it Silicon Beach, and it is very expensive. And
Uh-huh.
there's no reason to have a warehouse anywhere that the rent is going to be high. Put that shit in Burbank.
Mm-hmm. That's well, we'll get to it because that's exactly what they did after they realized their mistake.
Yeah, what are we doing? So yeah, when this was launched, it was obvious that it wasn't going to last. We didn't think it would crash and burn so quickly, but I guess they burned more money up front than anyone could have expected, considering it would take years before establishing an audience substantial enough to prove this network's worth. What they were doing was impossible, apparently. The math didn't add up. It's another movie pass business plan.
Yeah.
Step 3, question mark. Step 4, profit.
Exactly.
But let's dive into this latest article and the autopsy of Venn to see just how bad things were under the hood. And you can read the entire thing at the link in the description below, because it is definitely fascinating if you're into all that catty drama that plays out at startups or digital productions.
Yeah, this is an extensive article. It's multi pages. So we're just kind of
expose
hitting the bullet points here.
Yeah.
First, the optimistic hopes of a team of talented people. Now, Venn was an exciting proposition for many of the people hired to bring it into being. Quote, "When I got the job, I thought to myself, this is the best day of my adult life," a former producer tells Input. That producer and the rest of the more than 100 employees who were hired likely didn't imagine that within months of Venn launching, nearly all of them would be out of a job, and that almost 1 year to the day of that flashy trailer's debut, the company would enlist an accounting firm to help look for an acquisition. Yeah. Now it goes on to talk about their research into the company, the interviews with employees that took place, and the one point nearly every conversation came back to. Quote, "Despite its attempts to be the future of games media, they claim Venn was the most mismanaged company that any of them had ever worked at."
That's
it's
usually
just like
the case at a company that has a completely illogical business model where there is no path to profitability, but
the
everyone
goal here,
at the top is like, we need this shit to be profitable right now.
And the goal is that someone like ESPN would come through and buy the company, or MTV, Viacom would come through and buy the company. It's like, man, remember when all those companies bought MCNs for like $100 million?
Yeah.
What if we just did that again?
That shit is over. The age, the venture capital golden age ended a long time ago.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, it continues. It's a business, they say, that failed to understand its product and audience, with leadership that created a brutal work environment for employees. As one former worker wrote in an anonymous feedback form the company issued after a round of layoffs in late 2020, Venn is extremely wicked, shockingly evil, and vile.
Not mincing words.
And another quote on the overall view of the company reads, "To describe Venn in one word, a nightmare," a disgruntled former staffer says. "The heads of the company, they have no business ever again running any kind of production. They are in way over their heads. I've never seen a bigger shit show. A boys club culture. Top to bottom, a complete colossal failure." The article also goes into the pay disparities between male and female workers, because of course, as well as the failed promise of an inclusive work environment and a bro culture that allowed nepotism to flourish. Oh my God.
They would be there's
What
like
is
two there's like two quotes in there. Like, one is from a female staffer who was like, "I was highly underpaid for my position," and then a quote from a male staffer who was like, "This is the most money I've ever made in my life." And they were like similar positions. So either that male employee was being vastly underpaid at a previous job, which could be true, or they were just kind of screwing everyone except for their friends.
Yeah.
Now, outside of employee compensation issues was the cost of production itself, an amount that ballooned because of the company's location on the west side of LA in a 6,000 square foot production facility, a sixth of which was covered in LED walls. But even that production facility was apparently short-lived. Despite the fact that Venn spent a large portion of its money on its LA studio, less than 9 months after launch, employees learned it was shut down and production was being moved. To where? Nobody knew at first. One day we showed up for work and the company had moved without telling us, one former employee says. The studio was just gone, and for a while they wouldn't even tell us where they had moved to. The entire company, it turns out, had relocated to Burbank, to a much smaller production facility. Multiple sources agree that the company should have started in a smaller space to begin with.
This is another thing that these media startups, they all drop so much money on appearances.
Because they're walking potential investors around in their production facilities. They're saying, look how cool this is.
All their money they're spending is not on the actual product. It's on creating a strong impression on anyone who shows up for a meeting.
It's about a vibe.
Yeah, it's like, I mean, we've talked about it multiple times, but like,
look at the Business Insider article about Machinima.
The Machinima Business Insider office tour, which was just like a huge farce.
Yeah.
It's like that, they care about that shit.
Because investors want to, it's assumed success.
Yeah.
Because you walk in and you see the arm from Pacific
What
Rim
a
as a
cool
coffee table.
company where everyone's happy.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was. It's like I
Damn
had
it.
to like take the day off from actual work to pretend to.
And fill in spaces at some points.
Yeah,
Oh, no.
I'm pretty sure they
Oh,
hired
no. Oops, that was close.
actors
Like seat
to
fillers?
to fill some of the seats.
Or
'cause
they, at the very least, they spread people around.
They had just done layoffs somewhat recently at that point, and there were some empty spaces.
You're not shooting your Nerf gun. Couldn't
Why
help but
is
notice.
no one playing ping pong? The thing that we yell at you for playing usually, but
Yeah.
today I want to hear those pings ponging.
Yes.
So anyway, these are all internal problems at Venn that would have been nearly invisible to the audience they hope to build.
Yeah.
Once millions of people are watching Venn every day, these financial troubles will be a thing of the past, right? Step 4, profit.
Uh-huh.
But as anyone who watched their shows can tell you, that audience kind of just it didn't happen. It failed to materialize. It was. I mean, it's hard to get the full picture because they were streaming on a number of different ways. But if you ever tuned in on Twitch or YouTube, it was like the low dozens. Tops.
To be honest here, you can't, in good faith, say that there were some miraculous numbers somewhere else because Twitch is so easily accessible and targeted, and they bought front page access so many times that the lion's share of their views would have had to have come from Twitch. And at a certain point, they were getting a lot of views, though it was suspicious.
Yeah. So the audience was apparently smaller than people were aware because it appears as though Venn was oh my gosh, they were view botting their channel in order to convince potential viewers that it was worth watching and to convince potential advertisers that it was worth spending money on. Sounds like fraud to me.
Well, it's not exactly.
Were they doing the thing where they hide it at the bottom of news stories and
so
stuff?
it was that, and then they were getting promo on the front page, which anyone who logs onto the site is going to auto stream and count it as view. That doesn't mean they're interacting with the content or enjoying it. They're just browsing for the moment.
Google was like going to do some sort of crackdown on that sort of thing where basically like ad companies will embed a bunch of ads on websites, but there'll be a ad at the very bottom of the page where no one will ever scroll down that far, and it'll be a tiny video that's automatically muted.
Well, and it's also why
technically being watched.
It's also why news organizations, every single article has a auto-playing video.
Our metrics are amazing,
and that is what advertisers buy.
I mean, no one watches for more than 1 second.
Literally, everyone pauses it the second they go to the website. But yes.
So multiple sources say that the company was relying in part on its influencer hosts and high production values to sell the content. Quote, across the board, there was no viewership because there was no strategy, says one former producer. The article lists examples of the marketing failures, including the fact that the company apparently relied on their on-air talent to make up the viewership from their own followings, which almost never works, especially on the scale needed to back a multi-million-dollar company. And if you're going to do this, no one ever fucking understands it. They're starting to, but it's like, you have to clearly stipulate that in the contract. Like, if you are hiring someone for something because you think their social media following is part of the deal, it's not. You need to make a specific line item about that.
You're paying a talent fee. Fee. That's an appearance fee. It's separate. But also, there's been studies done about this. Even on huge accounts, like a Kardashian account or whatever, the click-through rate to go off whatever platform they're promoting something on is like less than a percentage.
Yeah.
So getting anyone to do anything that is off the platform they're currently doing anything on is next to impossible and never translates.
But advertising, it actually does work, by the way. It's super effective.
Yeah, especially when you when you talk to the hosts about promoting a product, which we'll get to.
Yeah.
We'll get to.
Let's just be clear.
We love
advertising is a great way to get your product out there, especially through like ad reads, like in the middle of a YouTube channel.
Yeah, a sponsored read where we talk about the product.
It's worth every penny that you drop on it.
Yeah.
Let's just be clear about that.
In fact, it's more valuable when you do it with us.
Yeah, added value. Because you get 2 hosts for the price of 1.
Exactly. I mean, we'll get to the ad read. Don't worry.
Anyway, here's where it gets a little crazier, though, regarding the view botting of Venn. So despite these issues in the network's early weeks, Venn's programming somehow enjoyed live viewership in the thousands. However, when looking at additional engagement metrics, the view count didn't make any sense to staff, leading them to suspect Venn had been paying for view bots. During one broadcast in the network's first couple of weeks, gaming insider Rod Breslaw, known as Slasher, on Twitter as @Slasher, unexpectedly dropped into Venn's Twitch chat and made a joke about the number of real viewers. When management caught wind of this, there was a panic, and after an all-hands meeting, the viewership began to drop dramatically. Quote, our views went from 20,000 a show to like 100 people overnight, says one former employee.
The slasher effect.
Yeah, so he guys slashed those views.
Yeah, it's a pretty powerful position to have management just shaking in their boots about just appearing in their chat. It's like when Jordan Uhl appears in a Navy chat.
Oh, jeez.
Oh, God. He's going to sink our battleship.
Hello, Secretary of Defense. I've got Jordan Uhl in my chat. What do I do?
Yeah.
So we've spoken before about how this happens on Twitch. You know, there was an expose a while back that showed the process of embedding streams at the bottom of high traffic websites, which would count as a view while the user browsing the site would have no idea they're even contributing at all.
Yeah.
But the funny thing is, you can always, with just an extra second of diligence, spot a channel that has been view botted, especially on YouTube. When we covered OZ Media, Ozymandias Media, like their YouTube channel is like the vast majority of the videos had like under 50 views, and then there were just random ones that had like exactly 50,000, exactly 100,000.
They're running them as ads before other YouTube content. That's how view botting on YouTube works.
And it's just like, come on.
A little bit of inside info there. That's how companies get away with it on YouTube. They run them as ads.
Yeah, perfectly legal. Very cool.
So the rest of the story behind the scenes plays out in the exact same way as the demise of every single MCN YouTube network, but at a rapid fire pace. And there's a lot of details in the article that you should read through. But basically, these big productions started out with the proper amount of staff to run them correctly. And as the money burned and the budgets tightened, there were layoffs, which resulted in those who were left taking on multiple jobs in order to keep their own, all while receiving no raises in salary.
The amount of fucking deja vu this is all giving me is kind of insane. So it's the Machinima speed run. They did 10 years of Machinima,
and this happened
like
in every
in some cases even worse. Like I think Full Screen was even more bloated than Machinima at its peak, and their fall from grace was much more rapid and had a lot more consequences for their employees.
Full Screen and Maker, because they had such a wide array of genres, whereas like at least Machinima was targeted. Yeah, like this is gamers. You're selling to gamers.
We only have to target one specific type of audience, and we somehow are gonna fuck that up.
So yes, the hosts and producers at Venn, they took on all of the responsibility, and the crunch quickly drove them insane.
As it will.
And in a lot of cases also created power vacuums where remaining employees attempted to seize control of certain aspects of production while management just looked the other way or created job titles out of thin air in order to please people. Oh, you're upset that this person took over an executive producer role? Well, now you're an executive producer as well.
You are the executive vice producer of content strategy deployment.
Yes.
And that's a very important job. I trust you to accomplish the responsibilities of content strategy deployment to the best of your abilities.
While I'm in this role, should I actually be learning what an executive producer does?
No.
No, the good news,
you're going to learn on the job.
Here's the good news, too. Executive producers, they don't do anything.
They don't do anything. Kick back.
Yeah, welcome to Hollywood, baby.
Yeah. So the company then switched to short-form content for YouTube to try to save itself. That's what we call a pivot. They reached the pivot stage. But then there were more layoffs. The writing was already on the wall, clearly. They were done. They were bleeding out. And they were looking to sell off their assets to a buyer, maybe, one that has still failed to materialize.
They're apparently still trying to sell the company.
As the article points out, Venn's social pages haven't been updated. There's been no new content added to any of their platforms in almost a year. It is very weird because I would regularly sort of check in on how they were doing.
Yeah, I had a couple friends that worked there.
They made no formal announcement that they were ceasing production. It's just like one day it just stops with no acknowledgement at all. Across all of their social platforms, across all the streaming, their website, it's like frozen in time on the last day of work.
Well, friend of the show, Sasha Grey, is doing just great on her own personal Twitch channel.
Good for her.
I think she's still playing Elden Ring.
But meanwhile, the on-screen talent, they've continued to do well on their own personal channels because that's where people know where to find them.
Yes, I liked watching that. I can watch more of that on their own channel.
Yeah, and we hope that the people who were working behind the scenes were able to land on their feet after this experience.
Yeah.
And, at the very least, they got a hell of a crash course on red flags to watch out for when working at these types of companies.
You know, it's funny, and I have no insight on their business at all, but I did inadvertently drive by. I didn't even know this place existed. I drove by the Phase production facility the other day.
Where is it?
Well, I don't want to like. I'm sure it's publicly available, but I don't want to like say the exact cross streets. But it's in a big part of town, and you drive by, and it's like windows with like high-end computers and stuff, like clearly visible. I'm just like, yeah, this is not good. This has happened before with other companies where people like just drive trucks through the window and then steal all their stuff.
Yeah,
but it's like there's FaZe logos all over it and
what
everything.
was that company we used to work near that happened to?
The Gaming League.
It's like, yeah, it was something
like EGL or something like that.
Something like that. Someone literally just like
drove a U-Haul
because they had just glass walls facing the street with their computers, like someone just drove a truck into it.
Yeah, I was just driving and I was stopping. I was at a stoplight and I looked over and I was like, huh, FaZe headquarters. Weird.
Anyway, that's a pretty extensive opening story we just did. So let's just tell you about today's sponsor now.
Who is going to do so well with our endorsements.
Yeah, because sponsorships are
they work.
The most effective.
Yeah, let's skip that bullshit.
All right, back to the news now with what could be Ukraine's David Hasselhoff dancing on the Berlin Wall moment for all the old heads out there who even know what that means, because U2's Bono and The Edge traveled to Ukraine and performed a 40-minute concert inside of a subway station over the weekend in an act of solidarity and to reinvigorate and inspire the citizens and soldiers of Ukraine. And look, I mean, whatever. This is dumb. We don't really understand how Bono showing up to your country to sing for you is supposed to help things outside of some momentary escapism. If you're even a fan of U2's music, I think they get a lot of unfair hate. Their first couple albums are still bangers.
They do have some of the most iconic, just bland rock songs ever made.
I mean, their first couple albums. Before they were huge, before the Apple era, before
so that was the big turning point. I think for a lot of people was a lot of the negative connotations with U2. They do come from the smugness of being involved in every humanitarian crisis on Earth. Yeah, which is they're trying.
Yeah, Bono is annoying.
Yes, they're trying to do good things, but they just always show up at every. It's like Sean Penn. They're the Sean Penn of musicians.
Okay, buddy.
But yes, the big turning point for U2 was when. I don't know if it was an iPod, not an iPhone, right?
Yeah.
It came preloaded with the YouTube album, and like you couldn't delete it unless you actually went through and plugged it into your computer and did some Hackerman shit.
Yeah.
So that was a big moment for U2 that made people not like them very much.
But yeah, so it seems like it's mainly this whole thing is so that Bono can score some more humanitarian points and also perpetuate the narrative that U2's music is the great healer and unifier that the world needs.
Yes.
If only everyone bought more U2 records. Imagine the paradise that this world would be.
That band ruined Joshua Tree. All the trees are getting climbed on by influencers. This is all U2's fault.
Yeah, it's all just very odd. Citizens, I know we've been through a lot these past 75 days. Many of you lost homes, family members, and are now fighting for your lives. But don't worry. We got a big surprise. It's going to turn those frowns upside down. Ladies and gentlemen, Bono and The Edge. That's his name, The Edge.
Yes. Now, to their credit, apparently Zelensky asked them to come perform. So what are they going to do? Say no?
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, and they do have a few songs that fit the moment of what's going on. There's a few songs that are, inspiring. It's a beautiful day.
That one, yeah, okay.
It's about finding the happiness in bad things.
More like Sunday Bloody Sunday.
They did Sunday Bloody Sunday, and they performed it like with some Ukrainian musicians
Where
as well.
the streets have no name. It's a good one.
So thematically, this makes sense. All right, it's just more strange news. Here's CBS with more. U2's Bono and The Edge held a surprise performance in Ukraine on Sunday, singing in a subway station in Kyiv. The singer and the guitarist were joined by members of a Ukrainian band as they performed hits like Sunday Bloody Sunday. President Zelensky invited us to perform in Kyiv as a show of solidarity with the Ukrainian people, and so that's what we've come to do, the band tweeted from its official account. And look, if it cheered people up, then look, this is great. Good for them. At the very least, Bono and The Edge are more brave than Louis C.K.
He just cut and run the second trouble showed up.
He had the chance to make the people of Ukraine laugh. He was already in the vicinity.
Yeah.
So instead, decided to avoid the region entirely. So, salute our heroes, Bono and The Edge. Not ours, Ireland's, but...
Speaking of Ireland, oh baby, it's happening.
What?
Sinn Féin won the Northern Ireland parliamentary
elections.
Yeah.
Okay.
It could happen. We might finally get 32 someday soon. Not going to hold my breath, but very exciting stuff. And also, Star Trek The Next Generation, literally, they're like, yes, it happened right around the time of the Irish reunification of 2024. And it's like, what the fuck?
People do be predicting things.
They do be predicting.
Yes.
Speaking of surprise performances, though, it looks like Travis Scott has been announced for his first performance since the whole Astro World tragedy in Texas, and we shit you not, he is apparently scheduled to perform at an awards show. Like, I mean, we could make sense of him maybe playing a small show to try to test the waters. You know, it would be in poor taste. I don't really think anyone would appreciate it less than a year from that tragedy, but it would make more sense than what's actually happening, if it even does end up happening. So according to Billboard.com, Travis Scott, Ed Sheeran, and more to perform at 2022 Billboard Music Awards.
So yeah, it seems fair that Billboard would know what's happening at the Billboard Music Awards. It looks like it's actually going to happen, and it would be his first performance since Astroworld. Here's some quotes from their article. Their article kind of reads like another brand doing a hit piece on the Billboard Music Awards. It doesn't really seem like the most fun self-promotion that they've done.
I'm sure it's two completely different departments, probably in two completely different buildings, maybe on different coasts of the country.
That's true. They are a large company, so yeah, it definitely reads...
Editorial and events, they probably don't talk much.
It reads very odd. It sounds like they're proud of this booking. Here's the article. The Billboard Music Awards will broadcast live, coast to coast, from the MGM Grand Garden Arena in Las Vegas on Sunday, May 15th at 8:15 p.m. Eastern on NBC, and will also stream live on Peacock.
Yep.
This is Scott's first awards show performance since a crowd crush during his performance at the Astro World Festival in Houston in November killed 10 people. Scott's remix of his song Goosebumps is nominated for Top Dance/Electronic Song. So, okay.
Interesting.
Yeah, so tune in. See what's going
Very
on.
Exciting stuff. Let's see how many people die this time.
This episode is obviously taking a somewhat serious turn. So let's instead talk about something that's pretty inconsequential in the grand scheme of things, especially since it is out of Florida, which that's a state that has pretty much only produced horrific news stories in the past few weeks.
Yeah.
Plus, like this story, it allows me to do something fun. It allows me to make Elliot read a bunch of really childish, stupid words and phrases.
I love that.
The state of Florida, they only do this every couple of years, and I think we covered it last time too.
Yeah.
They recently released the data regarding their personalized license plate program from the past 3 years. And now we all get to see what people attempted to have attached to their cars, but were rejected from doing so instead. In total, around 790 requested plates were rejected. And here's some examples that were provided by a local outlet, and oddly enough, a lot of them have to do with your butt. A lot of butt stuff in here that was rejected.
Hell yeah. So the rejected plates included the following: wanker, fart man, you idiot,
you idiot,
you idiot, doo-doo, oh farts, Mr. Poop, fuck COVID, F you Biden, F Trump, hell nah, hell yas, violent, crazy bitch, kidnapper, homicidal, CIA baby, FBI 19, and Ret FBI, which I guess is retired FBI.
Yeah, I do love that they're like, yeah, we rejected both fuck Biden and fuck Trump, and also hell nah and hell yeah.
Yeah.
So the great equalizer.
So yeah, luckily some edgy license plates actually did make it through the approval process. So let's see what the state of Florida came up with that passed their inspection. You got sicko with a 5, duh bully, sexy grandma. That very sought after license plate in some parts of Florida.
Yeah, the what is it? The
Villages.
The Villages. Yeah, this is probably on a golf cart already, but someone wanted to make it official.
And yeah, you know,
put it on my Corvette.
One of the old ladies like had the idea, and another old lady like stole the idea. Like, check out my new license plate. It says sexy grandma. I told you I was gonna get sexy grandma.
Pretty cool, huh?
You bitch. I gotta pee. That's a good one. Mo Sticky, get some, McNasty, Satan lives, I guess. Get you some, free as, Publix, and was fuzz. All right.
Some of those are just confusing enough to like get by, but Publix is something that even when I was growing up, we would joke about the name of Publix, which is the supermarket chain in Florida that is also look, they just like Chick-fil-A, they do a lot of terrible shit.
Yeah.
But they make delicious sandwiches.
I've still never been.
Yeah. So thank you for that, Elliot. Always appreciate you saying really dumb things. But also, I am sorry that I must inform you that one of your previous takes has been shown to be invalid once again. The worldwide feral hog epidemic is still raging on due to a lack of access to high-capacity firepower, and the latest victim of these wild boar attacks is none other than the Humble Picnic. Can't even enjoy a picnic these days without feral hogs, wild boars just coming through and destroying you, your children, and your meticulously crafted charcuterie boards.
It's like Yogi Bear, but Yogi Boar.
Yes.
Picnic-a-baskets.
Here's the Guardian with more.
Picnics have been banned. Picnics have been banned and bins fenced off in large swath of northern Rome as health authorities move to contain the wild boar population after African swine fever was detected in a deceased animal. Feeding or approaching the animals has also been forbidden, while people who have walked through farmland or nature reserves in the affected areas have been told to disinfect their shoes. African swine fever, which is fatal to pigs and wild boar but harmless to humans, was detected in the body of a dead boar in the Insugarata Nature Reserve on Thursday. The affected anti-boar red zones in Rome are located in the north and northwest of the Italian capital, including an area close to Vatican City.
They're going for the Pope!
Residents in several neighborhoods last week imposed a nightly curfew after a spate of attacks by wild boar.
They sound the boar alarm at like 9:30.
One woman suffered minor injuries after being pushed to the ground by an animal she encountered as she put out the rubbish. The Italian health minister, Roberto Speranza, said the situation will receive maximum attention. Andrea Costa, a health ministry undersecretary, said the government was also discussing a slaughtering plan to reduce the wild boar population. I respect the sensitivities of animal rights activists and environmentalists, but we are facing an emergency and it must be addressed with emergency measures, he told the state broadcaster, RAI.
Modern problems require modern solutions.
So we're going to kill them.
And everyone come out on your balconies and bang your pots and pans at 9 p.m. for the boars.
I think one of the last wild boar incidents we talked about was this insane video of this lady coming out of a grocery store near Rome and being cornered by a family of boars and like having all of her groceries just stolen from her.
We admit when we're wrong.
It's wild.
And that we were wrong about the feral hog problem.
They're defenseless.
Yeah, what are you going to do as an Italian? Swing some fucking cured meat at it?
I mean...
Get away!
A big enough salami can do some damage.
But the good thing is you follow those wild boars and you'll get some truffles every once in a while.
Yeah.
And there you go. So, look, you win some and you lose some.
Mm-hmm.
So, yes, if you're wondering, it does sound like a job for a few red-blooded American patriots. Wouldn't be the first time we've helped clean up Italy's mess. Our boys, our American boys, we can take on 30 to 50 of these feral hogs with a single assault rifle. So it should only take a small army in order to cull the reported 23,000 wild boars that live in and around Rome. So you're welcome in advance. We'll be sending...
send some of our top men.
Yes, they're on their way now. So if you hear warplanes overhead, don't worry. It's just the Americans.
It's the Americans. Nothing to worry about.
You're going to be eating bacon in no time.
Don't leave any pies sitting out on the window, though, because we do like to steal baked goods.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. We're Americans. We have a little fun. We steal baked goods from.
But we make up for it.
50 or 80 years.
80 years later, you get a pie in return.
Yeah.
Yes.
Anyway, that's our show, and it's the last chance to donate to the abortion fund.
Hey guys, welcome back to Clownfish TV. This is Neon. I am here with Geeky Sparkles.
Hello.
And we're going to talk about this article that was in Rolling Stone today, that Doctor Strange is another example of why Marvel has a director problem.
Mm-hmm.
I think Marvel's got some problems going forward, but yeah, we talked about Doctor Strange 2. It did make a lot of money this weekend. We predicted it would.
Mm-hmm.
But we also, during our review said that the movie was very disjointed.
Yes.
That there were bits of Sam Raimi in the movie, but it felt like too many cooks were in the kitchen. And Rolling Stone agrees with us, which doesn't happen very often.
No.
But we'll talk about that. We'll talk about how John Watts bailed on Fantastic Four like a week before Doctor Strange 2 came out. And that raises some questions. Is the MCU going to go down like Star Wars, where they're playing musical directors? And, even Doctor Strange 2, Sam Raimi was brought in to replace the original director.
Yes.
So
we keep seeing these creative difference issues at Disney.
Creative differences. So we'll talk about this. Before we get into it any further, please subscribe for more pop culture news, views, and rants. Guys, over 267,000 subs.
Woohoo!
please hit the subscribe button. Make sure you're still subscribed. Hit the bell for notifications. Make sure you get notifications because some people are saying they're getting notified of our videos like 3 days after the videos
Really?
drop. Yeah.
That's so weird.
So we create content almost every day. So make sure that you are subscribed and following us on social media. We'll post when we put new videos
We just keep
up.
checking because we put videos up daily.
Just check. Just keep checking. Anyway, yeah, I thought this was interesting. This was early this morning that Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness is another example of why Marvel has a director problem. And they basically, now there are spoilers in this video, so if you haven't seen the movie yet, you might want to...
So real quick, spoilers.
Spoiler alert.
Turn it off. Blah, 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 blah. Okay.
All right, so yeah, and we said during our review that there were bits of the movie that felt like Sam Raimi, and there was an awful lot that felt like Disney mandates.
Right, and it's like they should have just picked one side and stuck to it.
Yeah, and that's it. It was all over the place. We went from being a rom-com to a horror movie,
right,
to a tween drama on the Disney Channel.
Yeah, it it really was. It felt like several movies in one, and it felt like you said, too many cooks. There was clearly a bunch of people looking at this. We need this. We need that. And there was rumors of a bunch of reshoots too, wasn't there?
Yeah, they said they reshot like 80% of the movie or something, which, I mean, it shows. It shows. I mean, the movie was a mess. It had, it makes you wonder what it actually would have been if Sam Raimi had been given carte blanche to do what he wanted to do. But the problem with franchise movies like this is every movie is setting up the next movie or the next Disney Plus show, so they got to make sure that they tick all the check boxes. And it did feel, and I listened to an interview this morning, it was actually at Wes on Thinking Critical. They were talking about it, and they said that it does feel like there were certain mandates, like, okay, this has to be the introduction of America Chavez.
America Chavez was a big part of it.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not saying that they didn't like play up. Everybody's like, well, they make it woke. Not really, but the America Chavez thing, it feels like it's just a vehicle to bring America Chavez into the MCU.
Yeah, and she was
basically much what it feels like.
Yeah, and she was a huge part. We thought originally, during the trailers, it was like, okay, she's going to be the MacGuffin or whatever, and she is
a MacGuffin.
Yeah, but she might be in for like 10 minutes. No, she's the sidekick throughout the whole damn movie. She's in pretty much every scene.
She's there a lot, and she's like, yeah, she feels more like an object they're trying to fight over and pass around than a person sometimes. But I really, when I think about the movie, she isn't one of the things that popped in my head right away. Even though she's like the reason they're fighting. It's not one of the things that when you think about the movie and think back on the movie, she's not one of the things that keeps popping in my head.
Yeah, she was basically just there to make the multiverse thing happen.
Right. And so that they can use her later on and make sure we introduce the next phase, which are all new characters that people don't like in the comics that are gonna make you like in the films.
The characters that failed in the comics, we're going to force you to like them in the movies. And it said before, the first thing I said about Doctor Strange 2 in the review was, it felt like WandaVision Season 2 and America Chavez Season 1, guest starring Doctor Strange.
Kinda. I think but America Chavez in this movie wasn't like, I was really worried they would go ridiculous. Well, we said that we think they're trying to make these characters more likable. Yeah. Because if you look at the comics, you're expecting her to be like the comics, and let's be honest here, she's insufferable in the comics.
Yeah.
That isn't the case in the movie so much.
No, they did keep her space mom lesbian origin from the comics, which is weird, which they retconned out of the comics, I guess, but now they kept it. Who the hell knows?
But it's literally like just a flashback scene in the film.
30 seconds.
It's not like a major plot point. They keep bringing about her parents or her moms, but nothing that's like, oh my god, not like that.
For China, they'll just switch one of the moms out for a very femme guy or something.
There you go, yeah.
But anyway, yeah, so they said the only thing that feels Sam Raimi about the movie was actually the ending with the zombie. That very, very Sam Raimi. Some of the camera work, especially when Wanda was like hunting them, that felt very.
Some of the death stuff, I think, was more like him, but yeah.
Yeah. But they were talking about the question of authorship. How much creative control directors can exercise at the helm of one of these films has loomed over the MCU for years. Not much. Marvel, to its credit, has frequently hired filmmakers with distinctive styles, or at least ones who have made interesting movies. And it's not as though the studio completely flattens the voice of directors. It does get, but they definitely tone it down, and tonally all the Marvel movies are kind of blandish, except it's like, okay, this Thor movie is going to be a little funnier. This Black Panther is going to be a little more serious. But I mean, again, when every movie is a commercial for the next movie, and it all feels like they shouldn't even name these movies different things now. They should just call it like Marvel movie number 27.
Right. Well, then they have the Eternals, and it bombed because it was too much and shoved, like too many characters shoved in. But beyond that, it wasn't an MCU type movie.
Yeah, and I think that because it didn't do well at the box office for a variety of reasons, now they might even double, triple down on trying to make sure everything feels
right
Marvel, you know. But then that's what audiences want too. They want
but that's not what media wants.
Yeah. They said, they tell people to go nuts, but actually please color within the lines. The directorial directive seems to be...
Unless you're Taika Waititi, then he can do whatever the hell he wants, apparently.
They'll probably rein him in on Love and Thunder, too, to be honest. But
yeah, I'll believe it when I see it.
Yeah, they said they were rewriting the script during production, try to flesh out. And the problem with every Marvel movie being connected the way that they are now is that you have to have seen, like, every other effing Marvel movie. You can't just sit down and watch an individual movie. Now, when they first started out with the Marvel movies, you kind of could. Like, hey, I'm just going to watch Captain America.
Right, you can't now.
Just going to watch Iron Man. But now it's like, everything is interconnected. Now it's like, it's not like, hey, I'm just going to watch the Marvel movies. Oh, no. You're expected to watch every show, too.
I don't think Disney's going to change that anytime soon because they really want to push those Disney Plus shows as well.
Yeah, and that's it. And they're basically commercials for that. And I think that's why America Chavez was introduced, because they're probably going to either give her a Disney Plus show or put her in Ms. Marvel or something, but again, it doesn't feel like these movies are even individual movies anymore. It's like Marvel movie number, 228. Marvel movie
it's
number.
It's the Doctor Strange flavor. It's it's the Black Panther flavor. It's just,
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see what happens with Black Panther 2. I'm like, it's Black Panther 2 without Black Panther. This is like Valerie's family from... Remember the Hogan? Do you remember that back in the 80s?
Yes, I do.
So Valerie Harper, for those of you who aren't as old, there was the Hogan family back in the 80s, and Sandy Duncan replaced Valerie Harper because she wanted too much money, and they basically are like, nah, we're not paying you more, and they killed her character off. They're like, she got hit by a bus or something, and here's Sandy Duncan. Now it's Valerie's family, and then it's just the Hogan family, and then everybody forgot there was even a Valerie. And that's what it feels like with Black Panther. It's like, it's Black Panther's family. Now it's just Wakanda.
Yeah, it's Wakanda forever. Because it is.
Yeah. Team Wakanda, But, hey, they have the multiverse. They can just dip in and be like, hey, let's go get another T'Challa. Real easy.
Yeah, it just looks different, even though...
It looks a little different.
Doctor Strange looks the same in every universe.
This one's white. What happened?
No.
T'Challa's white. What the hell?
No, that would never happen.
That would never happen. So, it's pretty bad when John Watts is noping out of the Fantastic Four. And I think he would have been a good choice because he's the guy who did the Spider-Man movies, and Spider-Man movies are kind of funny, and Fantastic Four should be funny, and that's one thing they did not get right about the last Fantastic Four movie. It was way too serious. And I think they got, John Krasinski now as Mr. Fantastic, and he'll probably reprise his role, hopefully, maybe, I don't know. But he's noping out. Now, he's like, it's very amicable,
This reminds me of what we're seeing in Star Wars.
Exactly what we're seeing in Star Wars.
Patty Jenkins was upset, there was maybe she was going to not do the Star Wars movie because, there was some weirdness there. Like you get the vibe that she's being told what she can and can't do. And she's like, no, we're seeing it a lot. We saw how many directors get changed out in Star Wars for creative differences. And it's their tent poles have problems because they keep having creative differences all the time.
And then they set dates for these movies, 2, 3, 4 years out. And it's like at that point, even if the movie is not coming together, they're expected to shit the movie out by that date. Before it was like the movie was, the movie premiered when the movie was ready. And the studio would look at it and be like, okay, we're going to set it on this date or whatever. Now it's like, oh yeah, well, we promised, Marvel movie number 38 needs to come out on this date and come hell or high water.
They've been pushing them back though, but still, it's like, and this hurry up. Is it good enough? No, but they'll come anyway because it's Marvel. It says Star Wars.
I think eventually we're going to get to a point where people aren't just going to show up because it's Marvel. We saw the first crack in that, I think, with the Eternals. Because
they were all new people, and people who the hell are these people?
Yeah. Now, in the case of Doctor Strange, they had established characters.
Right. That's what I'm like. What's going to happen as we keep adding more and more new characters? People are like, who the hell is this?
Yeah. So this is what they said about John Watts leaving, and they were very business nice. This is Kevin Feige. Collaborating with John on Spider-Man has been a true pleasure. We were looking forward to continuing our work with him to bring the Fantastic Four, to bring the Fantastic Four to the MCU, but understand and are supportive of his reasons for stepping away. We're optimistic that we will have the opportunity to work together again at some point down the road. Now, I think he would have been a fantastic choice for Fantastic Four, no pun intended, because again, he got the humor, and Spider-Man crossed over with Fantastic Four a lot. And I think the difference is Spider-Man was mostly a Sony thing. I think he might have had more latitude, and now that it's like this is 100% Marvel, he's probably looking at this like, hell no, hell no. And then this is what Watts said. Making 3 Spider-Man films was an incredible and life-changing experience for me. I'm eternally grateful to have been part of the MCU for 7 years. I'm hopeful we'll work together again, and I can't wait to see the amazing vision for Fantastic Four brought to life.
So we want you to think outside the box as long as it fits in the box.
Yeah, right. And I mean, at this point, like, you think Disney would throw shit tons of money at him because he was the director on No Way Home? But I think he's looking at like, yeah, I had a buffer with Sony, and if I work for them directly, I'm not going to have a freaking buffer, and I can already see what's going to happen, and I'm talking to my buddy Sam Raimi, maybe, I don't know, and being like, holy shit, I don't want to even get involved in that. So now they're thinking John Krasinski could actually come in and direct himself, like he did in Quiet Place, because he directs himself.
Well, yeah, he can. Is that what they're saying they think is going to happen?
They think that might happen, yeah, so... but yeah, they've had all kinds of problems. Colin Trevorrow.
This is a list of people they've had trouble with.
No, these are people that they're thinking could take over Fantastic Four. But a lot of these people, oh my God, no.
Put a big X on that one.
Yeah, I think this is the most likely. I think John Krasinski could totally come in and do it. Him and Emily Blunt. And that's what everybody wanted for, well, not everybody, but a lot of people said fan casting. And he seems to just direct himself and his wife. So.
I'm good at directing my wife.
Good at directing my wife.
Deborah Chow. I actually don't mind her so much, but I haven't seen Obi-Wan yet.
Brad Bird would be fantastic, but he noped out of Disney. I mean, he's over at Skydance now because he's like, Disney just won't let me.
So these are fan picks?
These are fan picks. Sam Raimi, he's not going to do it. The Russos,
they already moved on.
Yeah, I think everybody's moving on. So it's going to be just like Star Wars. They're going to burn through a bunch of these people. But something's going on. I mean, the fact that Rolling Stone is calling it out.
Remember that there was the agent or something from Hollywood that said people don't want to do Star Wars films because they all want to do it till they get in there, and then they're like, no, we don't want to do this because they're so ridiculous. And apparently that's how Marvel is becoming.
Yeah, and I can see it because it's big money. There's a lot of money to be lost if they get it wrong, and they're probably doubling down now because of the Eternals. And who the hell knows? But yeah, it's going to be more of the same. So whatever. I'm honestly not even that interested in Marvel anymore. I was kind of curious about Fantastic Four because it was Watts, but I'm like, I don't care.
I don't care. Like Thor: Love and Thunder. I don't care. No. I really don't care either.
And we were there opening night for Ragnarok.
We were opening night for most Marvel movies. Yeah. I was the one that wanted to go, and I'm like,
I think the first one we skipped and we felt pretty okay skipping it. What actually was Eternals, because some of them, even though we weren't that excited to go see them, like Shang-Chi, we still went and saw it just to review it.
I like Shang-Chi, but Eternals I have not watched this day because I have no desire.
I have zero, and they keep trying to force us to watch it. Like anything you watch on Disney Plus, they're like, "Hey, up next is the Eternals, guys." Like I don't give a shit.
They do, yeah. Every time they run like Moon Knight or something, and you know,
hey, watch the Eternals. If you could suffer through Moon Knight, you can sit through the Eternals.
Yeah, Moon Knight was a mess.
All right.
So
we got to wrap this up.
Yep.
Please subscribe for more pop culture news, views, and rants, guys. We'll talk later.
Bye.
Now he's just...
Bill Gates is spreading dangerous disinformation. And I think we have no choice. My friends, I think we have to ban him from the internet and prevent him from speaking out about COVID ever again. Because recently, Bill Gates said that COVID is kind of like the flu. No, it isn't. That is not true, Bill Gates. He said that it's a fairly low fatality rate and it's a disease mainly in the elderly, kind of like the flu. Nope, I reject that outright because I will get banned on YouTube unless I say that, I guess. I don't know what the rules are anymore, but welcome to the wonderful world of censorship, where our good friends over at Myth-Informed, Mythicist Milwaukee, tweeted ivermectin saves lives and got a 12-hour suspension on Twitter. I kid you not, ivermectin does save lives, by the way, because it is used as a treatment in Africa for river blindness. And it is considered an essential medicine among the World Health Organization. Myth-Informed simply said ivermectin saves lives, and they got suspended for it. And so I tweeted, because we're just trying to test the waters, ivermectin saves lives in Africa. I suppose you can get river blindness anywhere, but it's mostly a sub-Saharan Africa thing. And for the time being, it seems like my tweet is fine, but Myth-Informed was not. This is the hypocrisy of censorship. That Bill Gates recently could come out and say this, and that's it? And are we allowed to talk about this? Is Bill Gates right or wrong? Well, let me tell you, my friends, Bill Gates is not a doctor. He is rather out of shape, frumpy, frail, and a bit obese. So don't take medical advice from Bill Gates. I said it before and I'll say it again. I don't care what he says. I don't care if he confirms your biases or else, or otherwise, or else, or otherwise. But here's the story. Aside from Bill Gates, I'd just like to point out Stephen Colbert canceling upcoming tapings of The Late Show while dealing with a possible recurrence of COVID-19 2 weeks after first testing positive. That's right. It's been 2 weeks since Colbert already canceled his show, and he's canceling his show again because he may have COVID again. Here's where we're at. Where we are at is that Bill Gates is now saying exactly what every conservative was saying a year and a half ago. And Colbert, who is, I believe, triple vaxxed, is within 2 weeks of having COVID, having another resurgence of COVID. You know, I'm not here to issue any speculation. I'm just here to point those things out and ask you to think critically about what's going on. At the same time, we're being told over in Maryland there's going to be a new wave of COVID infections, and over in China, they are locking people in their homes. Woman is dragged away screaming from her home by Chinese officials in hazmat suits while her son tries to protect her as COVID lockdown intensifies. What was that saying? You will own nothing, you will be happy. Let's talk about some of the cultural changes that are happening here, because I have no real comment on the health implications of Bill Gates' statements other than to point out he's a hypocrite, and according to YouTube's rules, Bill Gates is spreading dangerous disinformation. Bill Gates, as reported by KUSI, said during an interview to promote his new book that COVID is just like the flu, hurts the elderly more, and the vaccines are imperfect. Really? Regarding the vaccines, Gates said once Omicron comes along, the vaccine is not reducing transmission, hardly at all, particularly about 3 or 4 months after you take the vaccine. Gates' words are going viral online because the nation's top lockdown opponents were saying the same thing since the pandemic began. Many Americans and social media users were even kicked off the platforms for saying these exact things. Well, let's break this down. Bill. You can say it's kind of like the flu, I guess, but the mortality, I think, of COVID was like twice that of the flu, I think. But it was mostly in the elderly. So I just think it's funny that he's coming out and basically saying what everyone else has been saying the whole time. I also think it's funny that just weeks after first testing positive for COVID-19, the Late Show host Stephen Colbert has canceled upcoming tapings due to what could be a recurrence of COVID-19. The 57-year-old host first tested positive on April 21st, canceling the night's taping ahead of a previously planned week off. The show returned with new episodes on Monday, May 2nd, though now will be out for a bit longer as production is paused yet again. I think this is actually fairly simple. In this context, Stephen Colbert wasn't better, but they didn't want to lose money, so they were like, let's just, he's mostly better. I wonder how many people they got sick. The official Twitter for The Late Show tweeted on Monday, Stephen is experiencing symptoms consistent with the recurrence of COVID. Out of an abundance of caution for his staff, guests, and audience, he will be isolating for a few additional days, blah, blah, blah. I just don't care. I literally don't care about COVID. I don't care about any of this. I don't care to talk about it. That's not relevant. I'll tell you what's relevant. Our culture has imploded. It's on fire. It is chaos and insanity that Bill Gates can come out and say the opposite of what he was saying before, and you can come out and you can say, well, Bill Gates is realizing. No. Why was Bill Gates allowed to spread dangerous disinformation? Why? The system is broken. These people are insane. Period. That's it. Thank you. Have a nice day. What else can be said? Now, I don't know if the Democrats will try and reignite the COVID narrative for the election. I really doubt it. I think COVID, for the most part, people are just sick of it. Philadelphia tried implementing a mask mandate that lasted 4 days because nobody was adhering to it because they were like, no. I'll tell you what I think. I think Colbert is done. I think late night TV is done. I think big tech institutions are done. I think Elon Musk was able to get in and do what he did because the institutions are crumbling. They have failed, and something new is rising in its wake. Good, fine, whatever. I mentioned that video in the previous segment where this guy is like, you know, he's screaming about like, why won't Merrick Garland arrest the Supreme Court justices for lying under oath? And I'm just like, yo, when millennials inherit the courts in the next 10 years, it is gonna be lit. They're gonna be like, I can interpret the law as I see fit, so you're getting arrested. And then the right-wing judges are gonna be like, you're getting arrested. And then everyone's gonna be arresting each other. And I don't see how civil war I don't see any way out other than civil war. I mean, we got a strong moral issue in abortion and Roe v. Wade. We've got the media being psychotic. The institutions upholding crackpot BS. Okay, let me slow down. Colbert. He's this guy who produces this segment. What do we have it right here? Look at this. The Vax Scene. And it's people dressed like syringes dancing. And I've never wanted to punch my monitor more than watching something like this. Now, not any person, no violence, no. But like just my monitor like, make it stop. I don't want to watch this. I think we all knew that the system was rotten to its core when the Vax Scene segment was made. When regular, sane humans watched this, I guarantee you, there are no millennial leftists who believe in Marx or otherwise who watched that and they were like, woo, yeah, vaccine with Colbert. I assure you, there were no libertarians, post-liberals, or conservatives who watched that and were like, yeah. I assure you, everybody watched that was like, something is seriously wrong with Stephen Colbert, which is the point. Okay, let me slow down and try and wrap my thoughts up so you can understand what I'm trying to say. The fact that Bill Gates was allowed to spread disinformation then, or he's spreading disinformation now, shows the institutions have no idea what they're doing. The big tech social media platforms and censorship have lost their minds. There are no experts. There is no authority. It is chaos. Bill Gates, he was allowed to say what he wanted, but Joe Rogan wasn't. Weird. Now, Bill Gates is saying what Joe Rogan said. So what's that about? Control? No, they've lost control. Let's talk about Colbert and late night TV. I'm looking at the ratings for late night TV, and I was like, wow, that's kind of crazy. I know that, you know, the way we do our shows over at Timcast are a different kind of format. It's VOD, video on demand, and a live show that people watch later. They watch the reruns. We actually rival the key demographic viewership of late night television. Not Colbert. He gets about double what we get. But I'm like, who's still watching this? And then we had an interesting conversation the other night on Timcast IRL with Daryl Cooper of Martyr Made. He was telling me before we started the show that his parents love watching late night TV. That's what they would do. They would work all day. They'd come home and they'd put on Leno. Now you've got Colbert or whatever other late night show. The thing is, they're making fun of that demographic. And that's what I find interesting. When you take a look at the ratings for Colbert or even cable news, you can see that they're getting millions of viewers over the age of 55. Yet, these networks are making fun of viewers over the age of 55. Why? Isn't it the weirdest thing? You know, I was thinking about generations and aging and stuff. I saw this clip of the woman, is like a news story about the woman who played one of the angels from Charlie's Angels, and they're like, she's 72 and look how young she looks. And I was like, why would she want to? No, I mean, for like, why would you want to look like you're young? I just don't understand that. That's weird to me. I guess my beard's starting to turn white. I don't care. You know, my hair fell out a while ago. I just put a beanie on. The truth is, I've always worn the beanie, even when I didn't have hair, but I digress. Like, you look the way you look, you're going to age, you're going to get old. That's a part of being alive. And you have your demographic, your peer group. Why do you want to jump to a different peer group? I just don't understand it. And I see this with the decay in things like Colbert and the media and everything just falling apart. I don't know. You know, I don't know. This is not the same as I normally do most segments where I have like a key news story where I hyper-focus on it, but I was just thinking about the generational collapse, the desperation of the older crowd to appeal to a younger crowd and their failures to do so, and the gap between how information is consumed. So, you know, people have always tried to look young, I guess, but if you were 70, don't you want to just hang out with 70-year-olds? I'm a millennial. I am 36 years old. Wow, I'm an old man. And I have no interest in cranking up Billie Eilish and going and hanging out with a bunch of 19-year-olds. I got no problem. Actually, I actually do think Billie Eilish is pretty good, by the way. But it's not like I didn't grow up with Billie Eilish, although, you know, actually pretty good. But I'm not going to be like, let me desperately try
I'm not doing
to fit in
wrong.
with these young people. I'm like, I have my peer group. I'll fit in with who I fit in with. And if I'm at like a skate park and there are younger people, we all get along, we share in culture. And I'm not saying people who are different ages don't hang out. I'm just saying we consume information a certain way. The older generation consumes information a certain way. It is insane how desperate these attempts are. So let me talk about Colbert. Colbert.
I'm bored of this video. That's right, kitty cat. Meow.
Welcome to the HEV Mark IV protective system for use in hazardous environment conditions.
Everyone's got that game. You know the one. The one that shattered your preconceptions about what video games could be. Maybe for you it was the Italian plumber, or a soldier on a sneaking mission. But for me, and many others, it was a theoretical physicist with a crowbar. I was obsessed with Half-Life. When I was in school, I daydream about the fastest way to complete levels. One year I went to a Halloween party dressed as a zombie scientist. The head grab made of chicken wire and paper mache. I think maybe 2 people recognized who I was. God knows what the rest of them thought. I met Gabe Newell at a gaming convention in Germany when I was 19, told him Half-Life was the first PC game I'd ever completed. He said, "That's cool." I didn't have any follow-up questions, so I just kind of nervously shuffled away.
So, what's this all about exactly? Well, Half-Life just turned 20 years old, and I'm not a kid in Ireland anymore. Somehow I came to live here in America, making documentaries about video games. So I figured if anyone was in a good position to make a video to celebrate the legacy of this franchise, well, it just seemed like the stars had aligned or something.
I reached out to Valve a few times, but never heard back. Nobody responded, but I got the message. Half-Life is a difficult topic for them, unfinished business, a story left untold, an asterisk that qualifies everything the company has achieved since. It sort of hangs over their legacy like a rotten smell that just won't go away. But the influence of this series won't go away either. It radiates outwards from that blast 20 years ago, and its effects can still be felt today in the design of countless games, the work of modders, the legacy of esports, and the passions of a fandom that still persists today in spite of the deafening radio silence from its creators.
So then I thought, to hell with it, let's just do the documentary anyway. If we can't talk to Valve, then let's talk to all of those people whose lives were changed by Half-Life, the contemporary developers whose work was inspired by Half-Life, and the crazy ones who are attempting to finish the story themselves.
To do this, we'd have to hit the road for a couple of weeks, traveling from LA to New York with a few stops in between, a journey through the design and influence of Half-Life, a road trip into the unforeseen consequences of a series stuck in limbo.
I want to figure out what it is about this game that has us still talking about it 20 years after its launch. So grab your crowbar, friends. We're Black Mesa inbound.
The entire industry fundamentally shifted with the release of that demo.
So about a year later, you know, the mods start rolling out. Counter-Strike lands in 1999 in June. Started playing, I was like, this is totally different than anything else.
When I started at 2015, 2015 was actually already working on a Half-Life expansion pack that never saw the light of day.
And so we made a list of all the kind of cool things that were out there. The top of our list was actually Half-Life.
We kind of modeled ourselves after a AAA studio, which may or may not be the right thing from volunteer-only like modding project.
So many people were introduced to video games as a rich storytelling experience through Half-Life that I think it had a really big impact on a lot of people who make games, but it also had a big impact on people who just enjoy games.
So these are like all the old like Half-Life beta and alpha builds that I still have collected at my place of all these sort of old versions of Half-Life that I had throughout the years. And there was something, you know, I would get a lot of game discs over the years.
Dude, what the fuck?
And this was back when people were pretty open to get it. So yeah, here's like beta 17. Here's the Half-Life alpha build from October of 1997.
Did you play all these?
Yeah, the Half-Life alpha version from December of 1997. So this is, you know, the first year, right? But I sort of got all these builds and I was keeping them, and you know, I don't know why, but there was something about the game that got me really excited with sort of the animations.
So this is Blood Spy.
Demo, where they were sort of showing the tentacle technology kind of busting through the glass, right? And that was like an amazing demo that Gabe and the guys did. So I was just kind of interested in the game, and I think I pitched Valve on the idea of coming up to sort of tell the story of the making of the game. Sent an email, which I still have, to Gabe, saying, hey, what do you think of this idea? They're like, yeah, sure, come on up. So I headed up, like, you know, took a couple days off school to go up to Seattle, to fly up from LA to Seattle and hang out at Valve as they were finishing Half-Life. A company that had never shipped a game before. It was two guys from Microsoft, Mike Harrington and Gabe Newell, who were sort of trying to, you know, build this kind of new game company. And yeah, it's insane what it has turned into, but back then it was just a cool game that I was really excited about. And you know, everyone in the journalism world was excited about too, right? It was winning awards at E3, people thought it was like, felt fresh and felt different. So yeah, I just want to kind of go and tell that story. I want to say it was in like September of 1998, when yeah, they were pretty much like finishing up, like when I was there, and you saw the photos. That are still in the story, but they had the sort of head crab pinata that was like at the studio that they were eventually going to crack open when they finished the game. And again, it was, you know, it was a much more dramatic story back then, and we called it the final hours because literally they had to like finish the game, bug test it, and then what they put on that CD-ROM was like, that was the game, because there were no day one patches or anything like that, right? So yeah, I was there and probably spent, I want to say maybe 2 or 3 days. At the studio, and you know, one of the things when I do final hours is I'd like to talk to everyone at the studio, right? So it's not, I wasn't just talking to Gabe, but I was literally talking to, you know, John Guthrie and Ken Birdwell and Mark Laidlaw and all these guys that were kind of actually working on the game to hear their story. And it was, yeah, I was just fascinated, right? And as a kid in college, like this was a crash course in like what it takes to make a game. And I remember Gabe took me out for, I think, sushi one day, and I'd like never really eaten sushi in my life at that point or something like that, and I was like embarrassed because I was trying to figure out how to use the chopsticks, and he was sitting there eating sushi. I'm like, I feel like I'm going to be an idiot here, and I need to like figure out how to eat my sushi properly, use my chopsticks properly, so I impress this guy. Because again, he had come from Microsoft, like he was a well-off sort of well-known executive in the tech world, and Mike had come as well. And Mike's wife at the time, Monica, was sort of there doing the marketing stuff. So it was kind of a very much a family affair. Like I remember Gabe and his wife Lisa were packing like manuals for some of the boxes like on the floor, and it was just like it was a very simple time.
I was working on a first-person shooter when Half-Life came out. It was the first game I ever worked on, and the premise of the game was kind of cool. You played a fallen angel, and you had these powers, so you could turn people into pillars of salt or make their blood boil and they'd explode. And it was like, oh, that's fun, but it was very bog standard level design stuff. And that's not to say the level designer sucked or anything. It was just what was expected. It was the red key and the blue key, the crates and the scientists and everything was sort of the standard collective. You'd go through the levels and you'd sort of do it without thinking about it, simply because the way they were designed was very smart to sort of pellet lead you through, like a mouse through a maze. And it was the accepted norm, right? This was build engine to current 3D, and it was what people were sort of expecting to do. So we didn't think too much of that. Our demo was coming out like in a week, and then it was announced the Half-Life demo was going to come out. So everybody in the office downloads it to their machines, and their demo was not only longer, but it was better and longer than our entire game, right? And we were about to release a single boss battle of our game, and that was our demo. And it was like in a single room, and you just fought Lilith, and it was over. Everybody played, and it was like this quiet discomfort that sort of spread throughout the entire studio, right? And when I went to Cyclone, one of the first things I said was, I am only interested in coming here if you guys are not fully owned by 3DO, because I don't want to go over and work for 3DO. I'm not interested in that. And they were like, no, we're all independent, right? That ended that day. The demo came out, the game came out, and it just thudded. It was an echo of nothing. Nobody cared, because the entire industry fundamentally shifted with the release of that demo. Everybody in the gamer side and the creator side all had their brains collectively flipped. It was the They Live moment, where Rowdy Piper's putting the glasses on and seeing the signs, right? That is truly how I felt, going, oh, this is how games can be.
Love FPS games, right? Like Doom and Quake, and played tons and tons of them. That was, the leak happened, and that ended up being like a demo that they put out with graphics cards or something, right? But that came out, it leaked early.
Right.
And I remember everyone freaking out about that. The train ride stuff is kind of amazing, because I think it's at that time it was so engaging. You're just like, what is happening here? You can't wait to see kind of what happens next. What really happens, right? But for some reason it was just, hadn't been done like that before, so it was just something that I think intrigued us all.
One of the quietest, smartest openings that actually shows you precisely who you are, right? And precisely who you are is not super soldier created in a lab. It's not greatest fighter of all time. It's dude on his way to work. Casting a character who never speaks, so you're 100% placed in Gordon Freeman's shoes. They were one of the first games that I ever played in which the character you embody takes part in the inciting incident of the story, right? You actively are encouraged, tricked by the scientists to do something which causes all the chaos of the entire game world, so you're far more invested in fixing it. At the time, I didn't fully realize it. It wasn't until subsequent playthroughs that I realized how expertly crafted they had done that moment. Story was told at you. We were in our infancy of storytelling, where it was a bunch of probably level designers dictating some of the story, so they were loving to do this, but maybe that wasn't their forte, so it was not necessarily writers solely or anybody that was directing these things. It was more of like the collective team saying, it'd be great in this level, let's try this.
It was guys that all came out of the mod community, right? That was the smart thing that Gabe and Mike did, is the mod community around sort of Doom and Quake was incredible. And they were really smart about just like going, as you said, to like these kids who like learned how to use some of these, editing tools, and went to them and said, hey, come work, on this game. So yeah, that was what was cool, is the personal stories of of, I'm trying to think, like John Guthrie, I mean, even John Cook, all these guys that were modders that sort of just came into the studio, and it provided a lot of interesting color. And they had a very interesting structure there too, with these cabals, which I think they still use to this day, where it's sort of groups of people that would sort of all come together and build things. So yeah, as a kid that was like studying in college, I was like, this is just a fascinating sort of exercise and understanding like how companies work and how teams work.
I love the sound design in that game, like firing the pistol the first time you get the pistol, especially because it took so long. You'd get the tuck, 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 you know, the crowbar, and just when you were tired of just having the crowbar, they introduced the pistol, right? And then they slide in shotgun, you know, the revolver, the machine gun at those perfect times. But the sound, when you hear the world, when you hear that, you've just filled up your health. You know, that doot, 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 when your health goes a little bit too low on the thing. Critical.
Blood loss detected.
All of these things that feel like you are placed in that world. Pacing of this game brought you those moments. That tentacle is just unbelievably good, and it came at the right time. It came at a time when you needed something spectacle, challenging, and then just constantly hearing that duck, 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 duck.
I still remember I got an early version of Half-Life, and it was Halloween of 1998, and I remember I was at my place in LA, and I got so sucked into the world that people kept ringing my door trying to trick or treat, and I just was like ignoring them because I was sitting there playing Half-Life. And I remember it was that moment where you sort of have the helicopter outside and you've got the rocket launcher, and it was this moment where you're having this battle, and it grabbed you so much because what they did with that game, there's just such a flow to it, right? You were in this flow state, and I remember like the CD audio tracks on the CD that they had recorded, and they would sort of come into the gameplay, and you sort of get into the skirmish mode, right? And the music would start, and you sort of start these battles, and there was a choreography to it, which was just incredible. So I still remember that, like Halloween, and it was like starting, and it was like, you know, 3 o'clock, and like the sunset, all these and I was just like still so focused on like getting through Half-Life. Still remember the sort of the helicopter fight. I remember the guards sort of dropping down on those kind of like black, you know, lines, and like coming down and kind of fighting you.
Their AI wasn't that revolutionary, but it was. It was the first time it didn't feel like random people mobbing you, but soldiers around the corner communicating with each other and then tossing grenades around the corner. It was absolutely mind-blowing. The introduction of the fighting the helicopter came at that right moment when you're like, all right, I'm ready for something, and then it just kills you almost instantly. You're like, oh, okay, I get it. And they are the originators of having no cinematics, right? And that affected me so strongly that even with God of War, what I wanted was no camera cuts, but also no cinematics. I wanted you to be able to be, you know, in a room with 10 people, and I want to pay attention to that person, right? And if I don't pay attention to the other 9 people, I might miss something. That's really hard. Like, it's really cool to talk about, but I could see how they had to engineer certain tricks at the time, locking you in a room with somebody, giving them an active, but then inside of the narrative, having them encourage you to have an active, right? And they begin that right away with Gordon, I need you to help me with this experiment, right? And you become accustomed to that. First-person shooters were there to throw a bunch of enemies at you, empower you, and then, oh, we kind of need to slow the pace down, so let's put some security keys every once in a while. And this one really built up that, at the time, very popular mythology of X-Files, right? That sense of the truth is out there and there's a conspiracy, and the lowest person on the totem pole is able to elevate to the heroic stature simply by answering the call. And that's what you're doing. It's the classic hero's journey of the call to action. And that call to action literally happens right after you get off the train.
Half-Life wasn't designed in a creative vacuum. It was a direct response to the types of first-person shooters that were flooding the market at the time. Newell and Abrash are often credited as the inspiration for pushing the genre into a more story-focused lane. but the team they built around them were full of programmers who had been working on the bleeding edge of first-person shooter design for years. Many of those folks had come from Texas, specifically the greater Dallas area. This was the birthplace of the genre, home to both id Software, creators of Doom and Quake, and Apogee, later 3D Realms, creators of Duke Nukem. Around the launch of Half-Life, a group who had broken away from 3D Realms were looking for a new project. So on a brisk day in early 1999, they came together to brainstorm their future at the home of one of the designers, a young man who had created a handful of maps for the Duke Nukem expansion pack. To find out what happened next, I was going to have to talk to that young designer, where he still works and lives, a city called Frisco on the northern outskirts of Dallas, Texas.
I knew a bunch of people up there. I'd worked with Doug Wood, who was the lead animator at 3D Realms. I worked with Chuck Jones, who did all the character design at 3D Realms. Brian Martell, one of our partners, worked with Harry Teasley at Microprose. He was the art director for the project. And just kind of knowing each other, because the communities, especially back then, was super tight for people working in first person and 3D. And so we made a list of all the kind of cool things that were out there that we thought would be really great to be a part of. And the top of our list was actually Half-Life. We saw its genius. You know, it was doing what was a natural evolution of what needed to happen in first person. And even though like the original game, I think in that launch period sold like 400,000 units, like to us it was like, wow, this thing's going to be massive. It needs to percolate. So even though it wasn't like the biggest selling franchise back then, we knew that there was some magic to it, and we felt like we could legitimately help.
The team's previous attempt at going independent, a company called Rebel Boat Rocker, had their first game cancelled because they bit off more than they could chew, creating a brand new studio to create a new game with a new IP in a new engine. So if they were going to take on a new project, they wanted to only do one or two of those challenges, not all four. Half-Life seemed like a good fit. It was a successful IP, which back in '99 meant expansion packs were soon to follow. It ran on a modified Quake engine, and the design of the game was something they felt they could work within. So the team decided they'd try and reach out to Valve. But little did they know, as they were slowly filing out of Randy's house, that Gabe Newell in Seattle was already interested. He had read a blog that Randy had penned about the closing of Rebel Boat Rocker, and before leaving work that evening, decided to reach out.
That night, randomly, I got an email from Gabe. He said, hey, I heard you guys are free right now. Maybe we should talk about something. So I got on a plane, went up to Seattle. I had this idea of kind of simultaneously doing like a Rosencrantz and Guildenstern kind of thing with Half-Life, but also what if the pitch was you're coming at it from the enemy team, you're the bad guy, right? But then like because of the circumstances, you actually aren't a bad guy either. Like you have to be a good guy too. And so I went up, elevator pitched Gabe, and then gave him more. They were like, this is amazing, like we should do this. And then he was like, hey, here's the thing. We don't own Half-Life, so you gotta go down the street and talk to publisher Sierra, and if you could talk them into it, we're down, you know. So I drove down the street, and Gabe called ahead to let him know I was coming. I think that was February, and we got the deal done in April. That's pretty gnarly for that kind of business development, but they were motivated and I was motivated, so we were able to get that job done pretty fast.
To get the contract signed, Randy and his colleagues would have to incorporate as a new studio. Their first project was going to be Half-Life Opposing Force, an expansion pack to a game made by a company called Valve. So perhaps it's fitting that they landed on the name Gearbox. They started work right away, but soon realized that Valve's unique way of project management was not particularly well suited to collaborating with external studios.
About the game itself, Laidlaw was the person I talked to the most, and that was probably a sum total of 3 to 4 hours of conversation, of interactions, right? So you guys are on your own, totally on our own. We had to figure everything out on our own. We had no restrictions. I mean, I opened with my pitch, but they didn't really have any rules for us. I imagine if we went crazy, like I know of an expansion that was in development by another studio that got canceled because it just went too weird. It wasn't, and it makes sense that it was canceled. It was like trying to integrate, like the Team Fortress characters were in Black Mesa, and like there was some weird stuff going on, and they kind of like wanted to define the identity of the G-Man in a way that really wasn't compatible with the mystery that the team intended.
The project that Randy is referring to was known as Hostile Takeover, a game where you played as a junior G-Man who teamed up with the characters from Team Fortress, which Valve had recently acquired. As it happens, this was actually the first project that Call of Duty and Titanfall creator Vince Zampella had worked on back at 2015 Games, before he and the team eventually started work on Medal of Honor Allied Assault. But he has a different answer for why it never came out.
When I started at 2015 was actually already working on a Half-Life expansion pack.
Right.
So, that never saw the light of day. Yeah, it was more involved with the main story. It wasn't a side thing, but they were already in production on it, but it got canceled. I remember taking a trip up to Valve not long after starting at 2015 and realizing that they absolutely hated the guy that ran 2015, and it was like, oh shit, what happened here? So, and then after that, it fell apart pretty quickly.
While 2015's expansion pack was cancelled, Gearboxes would go on to great critical and commercial success. Opposing Force was celebrated for breathing fresh, creative energy into the Half-Life universe. So I asked Randy what were some of his favourite elements from that game.
The boss in the, I really, in hindsight, I shouldn't have done it because it's like kind of breaks Half-Life a little bit, but I recreated the Star Wars trash compactor after the Pitworm. And the design of the Pitworm, and Patrick's had to code that up to get it to and Stephen Ball did these amazing animations, so it's really creepy when that big eyeball's looking at you, and then the big claw, and you're like, oh crap. The barnacle grappling hook was a great idea. I think that was actually Patrick's idea. Because there was Quake CTF had the Three Wave guys added a grappling hook, and we were having so much fun playing with that. Hey, what would be a grappling hook in the Half-Life universe? There already is a grappling hook. It's the barnacle hanging from the ceiling. What if Gordon can get one stuck on his hand, or Adrian can get one stuck on his hand?
Okay, I'll cover you. The success of Opposing Force paved the way for a second expansion pack, and just like Opposing Force, the team at Gearbox wanted to tell the story of Half-Life from a fresh perspective.
The only reason why the first one happened is because we pitched it, right? There was no plan. Everything was kind of ad hoc, and then once that happened, I was like, I was pretty hungry, and I loved what we were doing. So I had a conversation with, I think it was Jeff Pops was up at Sierra about the possibility of doing another expansion, and the starting concept was, hey, you remember when Gordon's in the tram at the very beginning? And he's going down the tram ride, and there's a security guard just banging on the door trying to get in. Okay, so this is the game where that's you. That was our starting point, and we mapped it all out, and we figured out where what the Barney was doing, and we created the Otis character to give a counterpart to Barney, and had some fun with it. Barney was in the elevator when the cataclysm happened, when Gordon, caused the resonance cascade, and Rob Hieronymus, one of our level designers, I think that was the only thing he did on Blue Ship, but he spent the entire project just making that elevator ride just the most amazing. There's animation with things flying around, the elevator, crashing. It was like Tower of Terror in video game form. The stuff I worked on, I really liked, the whole game trains you to just run up to the health things and use them. And I have one that's broken and sparks coming out of it. And when you walk up to it and use it, it explodes. Now, I was nice. I did 1 point of damage, but did a huge amount of force, screen shake, pushed you way back. I wanted it to feel impactful, but I didn't really want to kill anybody. I just wanted you to feel oh shit, anything could happen. I didn't see that coming. That was a shock. That was a surprise. Kind of a magic trick on people.
When it comes to Half-Life, Gearbox are most known for their work on those 2 expansion packs, but the truth is that they worked on almost all post-release Half-Life content in some way or another. They helped a little on the cancelled Dreamcast port, and helped on various Counter-Strike projects, but it was their work on the PlayStation version of the game that resulted in one of the most interesting Half-Life side stories. An entirely co-op adventure starring 2 female protagonists,
PlayStation 2.
Half-Life Decay.
Whenever we do something, we always try to go above and beyond, right? So hey, PlayStation 2 looks like it might be an interesting platform. We were talking to Sony before it launched. We got access to some development hardware. Sierra had never published a console game, literally never published a console game. So we're I think we're going to be the first people for Sierra to publish a console game or develop a console game. We're going to do it on the PlayStation 2, and let's make it Half-Life. And so everybody was kind of on board. So it's just porting it isn't enough. We gotta what else can we do? Let's build another chapter. I played a lot of GoldenEye on N64, and my fondest experiences on console FPSs are when you're playing. You can have split screen co-op or split screen multiplayer. So I'm okay, we got to do that. We got to do it. It's got to be done. And okay, if we're gonna do co-op, Half-Life, there was Sven co-op, but what if we took that like, what if we actually design the game to assume co-op? But we knew, okay, we're gonna have 2 characters now, and we're gonna make new characters because that's what we do. Okay, what are the 2 characters? And what occurred to me was, when Gordon gets the HEV suit, there's an HEV suit, but there's 2 empty pods. Who are the scientists that are wearing those other 2 suits? Like, that's who our game's gonna be about, those other 2 scientists. And we knew, we already knew one of them. It's the one that trained us in the HEV training in Half-Life. So when you do the training, the tutorial mission, you have this hologram version, and we named her, I think we named her Gina Cross. And we named her Gina Cross because the voice actor was named Gina. Like, so all the audio files had like a Gina tag on them. And then we invented the other character, named her Colette. We had to take the resonance cascade from a different point of view. We thought, well, if you're the scientist in the HEV suits, one of you's got to be the one that delivered the sample to Gordon. Oh, that's cool, you know.
Half-Life had 2 official expansion packs and a handful of ports to various other systems, but among the wider community, something very interesting was happening. Half-Life had reawoken the first-person shooter. After years of uninspired Doom clones, people were excited about the genre again. This was the second age of the FPS, where a focus on storytelling, creative level design, and artificial intelligence came into focus. On top of that, the game was designed to be modder friendly, allowing developers to use this modified Quake engine to plug mods directly into the game's launcher. What happened next was an explosion of user-created games, maps and modes, single-player mods, deathmatch maps, new versions of Quake favorites. But in a world with servers and CDs packed full of Half-Life mods, nothing was as big as Counter-Strike. To get to the bottom of how this all happened, we traveled to Phoenix, Arizona to talk to an esports veteran whose entire career began with the launch of CS.
How old does this make you feel that we're talking about Counter-Strike being almost 20 years old?
Old. And because I was old when it came out, so to speak, in the sense of the demographic I play around, you know, and the sense of kids playing video games. So even when it first came out 20 years ago, I was kind of one of the older guys in the scene. And, you know, when you asked me to do this, and even last night, I was kind of trying to do some of my own research or remembering like what beta was what guns and stuff in case you asked me very technical questions. And it just memories were flooding back when I was reading these change logs of the different versions. I was like, I remember that one. I remember when we hated that. I remember when that came out. So it was like, it's crazy. 20 years almost, you know, almost 20 years.
Scott was the founder of GotFrag, one of the Counter-Strike community's first and largest news sites. He's been a figure at the forefront of esports broadcasting ever since, and was even a manager at esports team Evil Geniuses for a time. Today he chills out in his native Phoenix and helps manage the Counter-Strike Professional Players Association, a sort of de facto union which helps pro players with legal advice during contract negotiations and acts as a player-focused voice within the Counter-Strike community.
Let's rewind then a little
Sure.
bit. So what was your first experience playing Counter-Strike, do you remember?
Beta 1, day 1. Downloaded the mod. You know, again, it's also a bygone era. Like, what's a mod, right? You ask a kid, like, hey, did you download any mods? They don't know what you're talking about these days, right? It was just one of many mods that got dropped out of Half-Life being the most amazing game engine. And so, you know, Half-Life comes out in, what, 98? And so about a year later, you know, the mods start rolling out. Counter-Strike lands in 1999 in June. Downloaded it, started playing. I was like, this is totally different than anything else. Rainbow Six was a turn-based tactical shooter, kind of, so it wasn't what it was now. So there was nothing like Counter-Strike. Or it was some sort of World War II related thing, right? Return to Castle Wolfenstein. Right after Counter-Strike comes Day of Defeat as a mod, right? So I download this thing again, day 1, beta 1, June 19th, and I'm enthralled by it. I'm like, this is amazing. You know, and obviously, it's not what it is now. It was very broken. You know, it was hostage only back then for the first couple months.
CS underscore.
CS underscore, yeah. It was truly, hostage was the only game type. You went and had to rescue hostages if you were CT and defend the hostages you had taken if you were a terrorist. And then on top of that, you've got a set of guns. So it's not a loadout system, it's not a class-based system, it's a money system. So based on how much money you have, you determine how much that round you can buy guns. That alone, with the round system where everything restarts, we're gonna re-rack and start all over. Put you back at your starting bases, and here we go. Keep track of how you do each round. So kind of a continually reset. No health packs, right? No armor laying around, right? You get the stuff at the beginning of the round, you buy your armor, you don't buy your armor, your health is your health. Not an easy game, right? Fun and easy to learn how to play, and it's, oh, this is okay, buy guns, these are the maps, but not, again, like any good esport. Easy to play, easy to get into and kind of understand, but really hard to master the nuances of and actually get really good at.
After we finished and delivered Opposing Force, we kind of weren't sure what we were doing yet, so we just immediately went into some like multiplayer mod work, and we built something we ended up calling Half-Life CTF. And Patrick was just like on, every day he would just code up a bunch of features, and then every afternoon we'd just play it for a few hours. You know, at the time we'd also noticed some modders that were working on something pretty cool, some clever ideas that became Counter-Strike. And there were some other things that we had, and there was, like, Valve was messing around with their own mod. They did one called Ricochet, for example. And Opposing Force CTF kind of became the foundation of what ultimately became the Counter-Strike Yellow Box, where, in fact, it started with, hey, we have this, it's not enough to sell, let's create a collection of things. And so then we got a kind of hodgepodge of all these mods together. Counter-Strike became the lead, but retail wouldn't take it because what's Counter-Strike? So it was called Half-Life Counter-Strike. So if you see the original Yellow Box, you know, it's called Half-Life Counter-Strike, and then if you turn it over, you'll actually see a list of all the other little things we were all throwing in there to try to, you know, do a sum of the parts kind of pitch, like, hey, this adds up to $20 or $30 of value because of all these pieces in it.
The updates were hot and heavy, once a week, then once every couple months, and they were always new maps. Because again, back in the world of modifications, these guys weren't like, Cliff and Ming Lee didn't make the maps, community did. And you know, some of the most famous ones, the guy, David, that made Dust and Dust 2, and Cobblestone is, you know, full on, still in the business, making maps and levels and all sorts of stuff, right?
I'd love to know who made Scouts Knives.
Oh, Scouts and Knives, Rats, where you were shrunk and you were the little guy running around, you know, it's just, I actually like the ones that are still in play, that are classics. So Train, Inferno, Dust 2. People bitch and moan, like, why do you guys keep playing the same 7, 8 maps there? You know, we have a few that come in and out, but basically, these maps are 20 years old in some regards, or the core of them is 20 years old. Sure, they've been gussied up and trains have been moved a little bit in Train, but still 2 bomb sites in roughly the same areas, the same dynamics.
I have a copy of your favorite, probably your favorite version of Counter-Strike here. I just thought you might like to have a look at it.
By the way, Condition Zero. Yeah, Condition Zero.
Valve wanted, they were trying to, I mean, there was probably a lot of interesting business reasons that, you know, I think it's better off if they get into, but it led to a climate where there was some opportunity available to develop Counter-Strike in a few ways. One way was on the first Xbox, and Microsoft threw some money in for that. We put a little deal together, and you know, in hindsight, that was a mess. Gabe was really insistent, like, hey, dude, instead of doing the deal with the publisher like you usually do, you should do the deal with us. We're developers, we totally get each other, like, we'll take care of it. Like, oh my God, it was a nightmare. They did not know how to be publishers back then, and they did not know how to deal with people like us, for sure. So that was a mess, but we got started on it, and they were schizophrenic about what they wanted. We created maps which were totally compatible with the multiplayer Counter-Strike, that were designed as competitive Counter-Strike maps. We had all the guys working at Gearbox that were part of the original Counter-Strike team. Chris Audi and Johnson, who made Dust, you know, like, these guys were working at Gearbox. And so there's freaking awesome maps that we made. And then we made this kind of single player campaign, which really was like AI guys with you. You'd play the maps over and over again to accomplish certain challenges and criteria, right? So it wasn't story driven at all. And we were dependent upon some new work that Valve had imagined that they called, what did they call that? It was like GUI 2.0 or something, or UI 2.0. And they just went off the rails with that feature, and it didn't get done. We were dependent upon it, so that kind of screwed us up a little bit. And then they did this one big come to Jesus meeting with me where they're like, no, you know what, you should make it like Opposing Force, where it's all single player and campaign driven. And I'm like, in Counter-Strike, like, I don't think that's what customers want, you know. And at that point, I had taken a lot of risk. You know, they weren't really financing development. So it was really, I mean, they threw a little money at it, but not nearly what we spent. So I was like, this is kind of bullshit. So I walked. I told them, fuck off.
Gearbox had invested thousands of hours in their version of Condition Zero, a CS that focused on multiplayer but added a Tony Hawk-inspired offline mode where players would repeat levels to complete challenges. But Gearbox was actually the second studio to take a swing at developing this game. They had taken over from Rogue Entertainment in 2001. The game eventually found its third home at Ritual Entertainment, who Valve contracted to make the single-player focused version that they had unsuccessfully pitched to Randy. The game went gold and review copies were sent out, but when the scores didn't look so good, Valve actually pulled the launch of the game and dumped all of Ritual's work. The game found its fourth home at Turtle Rock Studios, who finished the game by taking the seed of Gearbox's vision and packaging it alongside 12 of Ritual's single-player levels under the banner Deleted Scenes. It seemed that Valve were more comfortable buying out external teams than working with them remotely. At that time, Gearbox was still under contract with Valve, but by this stage, Randy wanted out.
We kind of did a deal. They were kind of shitty about it, frankly. But we did a deal that got us separated. They were, in hindsight, both at the time it felt shitty. In hindsight, it was horrifyingly exploitive. I'm really not pleased about it. And it soured a lot of ways I thought about Valve for a long time. They did to us things we never would do to any developer. It's really annoying.
Has time healed that?
You know, I had a talk with Eric Johnson years later about it, and he kind of shared there were some other things going on behind the scenes that were really affecting Valve, and you know, it made their behavior make sense, but it was like still shitty. Yeah, ultimately he told me that what they were really doing is the game couldn't come out because of some other things. They were doing the big play with Sierra where they were trying to reacquire the Half-Life IP.
So they were buying time?
Yeah.
At your expense?
Yeah, at our expense. Yeah. And I said, dude, you should have just leveled with me. I'd have played the game with you. We're supposed to be on the same team, man.
As the community created more and more free mods, Valve seemed determined to bring these under the wing of the studio and make commercial versions of them. Counter-Strike's box copies hadn't been very successful, so they started work on a sequel to Team Fortress Classic and hired the team responsible for Day of Defeat. A retail version of that was published by Activision in 2003. But outside of Valve's control, post 1.0 Counter-Strike was expanding into new and exciting avenues. Professional gamers had existed before, but usually just as cheap marketing gimmicks. But as broadband expanded throughout the world, it actually made watching esports events possible for the first time. Sites like Godfrag went to great lengths to broadcast these matches to fans all around the world, and suddenly there was an audience. And with this audience came sponsors. Counter-Strike was an esport, and the community was holding all of the cards.
I'll use the word we a lot. I don't even mean, it's more the royal we. It's not me as in Scott, but we as the community built this game. They gave us one thing, this hostage rescue thing, with a few maps, a few guns, and feedback just started coming day one hot and heavy. More maps started being developed, more guns started coming. They would tweak, they would adjust what we said. And then the hardcore took this, and we took it one step further and go, okay, how do we compete on it? Should it be 12 rounds? Should it Europe was going with chargers only, which meant only the offensive team scored rounds. You know, we kind of, as a community globally, playing in different leagues and on different ladders, kind of figured out what is now, for the most part, the standardized rule set of competitive Counter-Strike, which Valve then took to heart when they added it, and you know, Global Offensive has matchmaking the kids play on. It roughly uses those same parameters now, right? We basically played the same game we played for 18 years, right? After those first couple years of development with Counter-Strike and figuring out the game and then how we compete in the game, we've just gone for it since then.
Counter-Strike's story doesn't end there. We'll dedicate a shorter video to chew that one out, but the cliff notes look something like this. Valve released Counter-Strike Source alongside Half-Life 2 and split up the casual base, but the professional players pretty much universally hated it. 1.6 was king. That was until Time made a mockery of that too. And the money, of course. Esports had moved towards the expanding market in strategy games. Counter-Strike Pro players were left in the lurch as their old version didn't get any updates. All the while, the Half-Lifers were gifted expansion pack after expansion pack. But just like CS, eventually StarCraft became old news too, toppled by a modified version of that genre. Valve smelled the blood. They had made a massive mistake in not owning the esports wing of the previous mass market online mod. It wouldn't happen again. They hired a bunch of modders and, well, you probably know the rest. But Counter-Strike wasn't done either. The newly released version, Counter-Strike Global Offensive, wasn't exactly the most popular game at launch, but through work with the community, it has since exploded in recent years, and is even more popular than 1.6 was back in its heyday. Counter-Strike fans are enjoying a renaissance now, while all the Half-Lifers are still waiting on that last expansion pack. If only they could sell gravity gun skins, I hear you say, we'd be playing episode 3 by now. And there it is, the fanboy bitterness. The spectre of episode 3 is easier to ignore when we're talking about the good old days, but to be a contemporary Half-Life fan is to smile through the disappointment. Don't worry, we'll get to Half-Life 2 in just a second. This story is far from over. But first, I think we could all use a bit of a break.
Alright, so we've been to California, we've been to Texas, we're now in Arizona, talking to people about their experiences with Half-Life. And it's weird because I thought I was going into this wondering about the development of these games and like how they impacted people in terms of design, but what's kind of actually come up is how it's impacted their lives in an interesting way. Like Cory Barlog, like he doesn't really make first-person games, but he has all of these other like emotional touch points he has with the series that, you know, are connected to various periods of his life. Randy Pitchford, he's probably the closest to it in terms of design because he'd worked on those games, but he also has a lot of like emotional and like business baggage with the entire Half-Life franchise. In fact, one of the weirdest things about this is that all of these people, to a person, have all wanted to talk to us about Half-Life. Like literally every single person we emailed about this documentary said yes, and then, you know, took time out of their schedule, and also, you know, some of them had PR people fly in from a different city to make sure we could do this, to talk about a game that none of them worked on that came out 20 years ago. So when I think about that in relation to myself, it's making me think why I'm doing this. Like we could have done a documentary on anything this month, so why did I force Jeremy to get in a car with me with his massive camera? It's a convertible, by the way. To go all around America and talk to people about this old-ass game. Like, it obviously means a lot to me as well. I'm not really sure. I'm still trying to, like, process this whole thing and figure it out. But one of the things I definitely wanted to do while we were in the sort of general Arizona area, since we were in Phoenix talking to Scott, was go visit some mesas. I've never seen a mesa before. The Black Mesa in Half-Life is actually based in New Mexico, and I looked around some places around New Mexico and the sort of general area around here, and none of them really looked exactly the way I remember the game, when you come out of that tunnel and you're fighting the Marines on the outside of that massive, you know, view of the river and the mesas in the distance. But the place that did look like it to me was actually northern Arizona. Now, we probably can't get up that high, but we're going to get high enough, and I mean high in the spiritual way. We're going to Sedona, which not only is famous for its beautiful mesas, but also for its various vortexes. And if you know the narrative of Half-Life 1, you know that vortexes and vortigons and portals are a very important part of what makes that game special. So this is our spiritual journey into the heart of Half-Life. Let's see if we find what the vortexes have for us.
Hello and welcome to the beautiful mesas of Sedona, Arizona. We woke up especially early this morning to try and see the sunrise, but unfortunately nature had a different idea. But as it turns out, it kind of works a little bit better for my, you know, beautiful HEV jumper here. I feel perfectly dressed for the occasion. One of the reasons I wanted to come here was because the mesas in Half-Life, it's almost like a Disney lot or something. They're just these like, it feels like you can reach out and touch the like cardboard sides of them. And seeing them in real life, it actually kind of feels the same way. Like when we drove in here, there's something about the scale of these things that doesn't feel real. It's especially weird because they're so big and they're also like so on top of the town. Sedona is one of these places where people, you know, there's a lot of crystal shops. People come here for the energy. They check out the various vortexes. Is there a vortex here? There's probably a vortex. We probably drove past a couple of vortexes on the way up here. And it does have a special energy to it. It's kind of different to Half-Life in that Half-Life's mesas there's like no foliage on them whatsoever. But in a weird way, I feel like thematically it's actually a little bit closer to the original Half-Life, you know. Precious gemstones being pushed into scientific machines and portals spewing out energy. I'm basically trying to justify a trip to Sedona for this documentary. But the whole thing has me kind of thinking about that, like, you know, that weird out-of-body experience. And it actually kind of reminds me of, have I ever told you that story about when I was in the mission, stoned in San Francisco? So this is years ago. When I first moved to San Francisco, I was in the back of a comedy club on the mission with a friend of mine, some people I used to work with. So we had some edibles. And what's weird is one of the only audio hallucinations I've ever had in my life was when I played the first Half-Life in the summer of '99. And I played it for like 5 or 6 hours straight. And I remember walking away from the computer and being able to hear the soldiers. You know those like radio calls where it's like, where is he? And we've got Freeman and all that sort of stuff. I could like still hear them. So flash forward to like, this is maybe 3 or 4 years ago. And I'm in the mission and I've taken these edibles and I can hear the doctor from Half-Life 1 and Half-Life 2, Dr. Kleiner. You know that voice like, oh, Mr. Freeman. I can hear him.
Get away from there, Freeman. I'm expecting an important message.
And I'm like, oh my God, like this is I'm having like another audio hallucination and they always seem to be about Half-Life. And I'm laughing about it and I'm telling my colleagues and stuff and we're all rolling around on the floor or whatever. But it's like 30 minutes have passed and I can still hear him. And it's a bit weird that this hallucination's really like holding on. So it was in the back of this like weird comedy club theater thing. And at a certain point I like poke my head out from like behind, like it's more like behind the set. And I poke my head out and I can see there's like a bunch of people in the audience and there's this guy on the stage and like now I'm looking at him and he's moving his lips and it sounds like Dr. Kleiner. So like at this stage I'm like I need to like figure out if I'm like having this really strong hallucination or whether or not this is actually happening. So I check the posters around and there's a name on it that says Harry S. Robbins and I look up, Moby Games or something and check out the credits for Half-Life and it's him. Dr. Kleiner like is literally on the stage talking to us. He has some like science podcast or something. So after the show ends, he like comes backstage and I'm like completely off my gorge at this stage. I'm like, oh my God, it's so amazing to meet you. Like, what was it like, like 15 years ago or like, I guess 5 or 6 years ago doing the voice of this character. And like, he literally speaks that way. And he's like, oh, it was very fun. Valve are a great company to work for. And I don't know anything about Half-Life 3.
Great Scott! Gordon Freeman! I expected more warning.
So yeah, I'm not sure what the lesson is here. If you're getting stoned in the mission, try and not make
Hello there.
where hallucinations and reality are going to intersect with each other. That's probably my weirdest Half-Life story. Although maybe climbing to the top of a mountain wearing a HEV sweater is a close second, let's say.
As it turns out, the sequel for Half-Life would be set far from many mesas, but its launch would be no less revolutionary. Half-Life 2 went through countless missed release dates, and a hacker who spread the game's files all over the internet for every game developer under the sun to poke through. But that didn't stop it from being what many consider to be the best first-person shooter ever made. When you're a fan of video games, it's almost indistinguishable from sports. We follow developers like our favorite team, Indie.
Be right back. Alright.
Studios are like the underdog story. Big publishers are the evil empire. We cheer when an old legend rises again and scream at the television when our favorite underperforms. So, when a studio knocks it out of the park on their very first hit, we don't expect them to walk up to the plate a second time and do it again. That doesn't happen. id Software was as close to we got as that type of MVP. They went from Wolf to Doom to Quake, but even they couldn't seem to compete in a post-Half-Life world. Maybe Valve knew this. Maybe they knew to make a revolutionary great game is one thing, but to follow it up with another, well, that's gonna take something very special. Once again, it was time to raise the bar.
Yeah, Half-Life 2 is even more interesting because we did that first story, and it got a lot of attention, and I think it was like, oh, let's do something for the second one. And then the original pitch for the second one is that I was going to write something called The First Hours of Half-Life 2, which is basically going to be the reveal of the game. But I went up to Valve and they gave me a demo of it, and I sort of started to work on the story. And then I think they called up a few weeks later and said, oh, by the way, just kidding, we're not going to announce the game now. And they kind of pushed back the announcement even after they had already done some initial kind of interviews or demos. So I used all that information from what was going to be the first hours of Half-Life 2 to turn into the final hours of Half-Life 2, and then obviously that became a much, grander story with the hack and, all that stuff around it.
Oh.
Right? So Half-Life 1 was
Oh, this looks fun.
Figure out how to make an action game. Half-Life
Let's see.
2 was a team that felt the obligation of delivering for a fan base and the crazy expectations that come with kind of pushing the limit of what you can do. And they were trying to push, technology. They were trying to push gameplay. So there was it was a bigger studio, but there was a lot of weight on their shoulders with Half-Life 2 because they didn't want to sort it.
Jay Stelly showed me when he first got physics implemented in the engine, and they licensed. He's like, yeah, we licensed this stuff Havoc, and we started to get the stuff and he had this little view model for a tool that he could use in the game to throw physics objects around. And
I can go over there.
Awesome. And he's like, yeah, we're talking about, like, we think this is so much fun to, like, take a body and throw it into the pachinko machine, like, there's, like, classic physics demos, like, knocking pilot crates over. We think we need to make this, like, a weapon or a tool somehow in the game, because it's just so much fun just to play with the physics, and that became the gravity gun, and it's like, that's some of the genius, I think, of the Valve developers. Like, literally that same week, I was looking at id Tech 5. I was looking at ID's.
Hello there.
And they had just implemented their homebrew physics. Like they created the physics solver themselves, and they had.
Holy crap! I did big damage.
To manipulate physics in the engine, and the mistake I made was because I knew what Jay's comment was. I said, "That's pretty awesome. You should think about letting the player have that fun because you're having fun. Like that's fun." And Tim's answer was, "No way. That's way too much power. We can never give that to the player." That says everything I need to know right now about like when Valve stumbled upon a fun thing, their instinct was to try to find a way to give it to the player, whereas like the id mentality was like afraid of if the player would break the integrity of the technology. And yet, you know what? You can break Half-Life. Like you can create problems with the physics constantly, but who cares? Like some of the most successful games in the world right now are super janky.
The world is also built out of materials. So if something looks like wood, then it sounds like wood, scrapes like wood, floats like it, and if you shoot it, it'll fragment like wood. Materials in the physics system interact with each other, so a set of steel drums floating will behave exactly how you expect. Didn't think this would be complete without a giant pachinko machine.
Yeah, I think that whole kind of taking physics as a real piece of gameplay, right? That kind of really stood out as something new and unique. And there was some frustrating moments with it, right? But there was some just amazingly fun moments where you could just sit around and play with it and see what could happen. And your experience was different than mine because we did things slightly differently. That's always cool.
And I mean, at the beginning of Half-Life 2, that is an incredible sequence of world building. When you repeat the train, that by then when you get off, it's a very different experience. It's very Orwellian, right? The military state oppressing all these other people, and you can kind of throw the cannon at the guy, and you pick that up, and like hitting you with a baton, right? Like I remember like throwing the thing back at him, and he hits me with the baton, and it's like you get to experience, again, brilliantly experience firsthand the stakes of the world and the world building. The world building isn't something happening behind glass. The world building happens to you, right? And I think that's literally the only thing what makes games unique is that you don't passively watch, you participate. And the more people that can figure out how to make you participate in the world building and the active sort of goal of the world, I mean, it's brilliant.
I mean, the stuff with Alex I thought was really incredible, right? As a character that you would really relate to. So it was sort of, they had done some fun, campy kind of character moments in Half-Life 1. People, I think, forget how much Valve pushed forward on technology with sort of everything they did, right? So like even the original Half-Life, they worked with this guy at NYU, Ken Perlin, and did the, like the facial expressions, like how can you build off of that? Ken Birdwell, like he had, new kind of animation systems he was designing to sort of, make the tech work. And yeah, as you said, like with Half-Life 2, it was like, the physics gameplay, and it was like they were really, always interested in kind of pushing tech, using tech to improve gameplay too, right? So it wasn't just like, hey, here's our crazy new graphics technology. It was like, no, like these physics are going to actually impact like how enemies, interact with you. And then you get to moments like, the Strider fights or something, right, in the town, where it's just like there's music, there are enemies, and that sort of choreography or dance, the skirmish that would take place. I mean, those are some of my favorite moments in both games. It was like 2 weeks before the game was supposed to come out, and they still wouldn't even comment on like what was going on with it. And there was, I think, I remember a weird event at Alcatraz that I went to that they had done, I think, with ATI or something, where it's like the game was still supposedly coming out in like 2 or 3 weeks, and they did this event, but they wouldn't comment on if it was really coming out. Yeah, it was really weird, and like it was like they were all there and they wouldn't say anything, so they had this whole party, and then it didn't come out, and then finally, like it was like the week before or something, they're like, oh, by the way, it's like not coming out anytime soon. Those guys really care about their products and their customers, and they don't want to lie to people. And I think it's like one of those things where you get in a bad situation, whether it's like any kind of relationship, and you're just sort of like, well, how do you address these things? How do you talk about things? And it sort of becomes a thing where it's like you just what's unsaid, right? And I think there was a little bit of that where it sort of was like they didn't really know what to say, right? And they didn't want to say something wrong, so they say nothing, right? And that's sort of same thing would happen with episode 3, and I mean all that stuff. It just sort of it's like there's not a lot to share. They don't know what to share, so they'd rather just sort of not say anything. And that certainly happened a little bit with Half-Life 2. So yeah, there was definitely a shift from 1 to 2, and that there was an obligation now to sort of deliver to this fan base that had a rabid appetite for more Half-Life.
Half-Life 2 changed the FPS, but this story didn't end the way it was supposed to. 3 expansion packs were promised, but instead of licensing them out, Valve would work on them internally themselves. The first was late and fun, but unremarkable. The second was much loftier and ended with a bombastic set piece that landed on a narrative cliffhanger. The third, well, it's been 11 years now, so you may want to cancel that pre-order. I've worked in the games press for about 7 years now and have heard all of the rumors that the game was spun up again by cabals within Valve a few times, but none of those projects gathered traction. That there's a virtual reality project centered around the Half-Life universe that may or may not still be in development. Was Episode 3 worked on, or was it Half-Life 3? Or perhaps was it neither? Maybe it was just a Vive game where you shake a crowbar around. Or has Valve just moved on? Has pressure, time, and the changing of the guard pushed them further from the Half-Life universe? I figured if anyone would know, it would be Jeff.
I mean, it's been so long, right? I think it's, yeah, you said it's one of the internet's great mysteries, right? And look, believe me, every year it's like when I, daydream about the Game Awards, it's like, I imagine that moment with, Gabe walking out with the crowbar and like, here we go, right? And it's like, we all want that, right? But that's just, it's a fantasy at this point. And yeah, all the stuff around kind of Episode 2 and Episode 3, I mean, that was just so long ago. It has become sort of a parody of itself. I don't know how much they really think about the Half-Life stuff anymore, honestly, even, right? And I think it's out there. I think a lot of the people that worked on it have left. It's sort of a different group of people that are there now. It's a classic franchise. It means so much to all of us. I don't think there's like a crack team that like is, spending months thinking about like how do we grow the franchise, what do we do, et cetera, et cetera. I think it was kind of a point in time, and as you said, there became so much pressure over the years. I don't know. It's so hard to sort of tell, and Valve has gone off and done so many different things and interesting things. I don't even know what like a Half-Life 3 is right now, right? Is it like a story-based single-player game? Is it a multiplayer thing? Is it a battle royale. I mean, it's just like you know,
virtual reality.
well, that's what I mean. And then, like, yeah, there's VR. So I mean, there are a bunch of different ways to sort of skin that cat in terms of what they could go. But I think the thing is, you know, Half-Life 2 pioneered a lot with physics-based gameplay and sort of other content. So I think Valve always thinks about like, how are we going to push the genre forward if we did something? Yeah, it's one of those brands that, you know, at some point, hopefully will come back in some form, but I don't really know what form it will be.
Do you have like sympathy for the position that Valve are in? I'm not sure if sympathy is the right word, but do you think they're in a difficult position, maybe?
I think sympathy probably is the right word. Yeah, I mean, you look, it's like working on something like Call of Duty. You have this expectation of you can't change everything, but you have to change everything. And it's this weird, you know, we go to work every day wanting to make the best thing possible. We don't want to screw players. We don't want, you know, like, we want to make the best thing too. But it's not always exactly obvious what you need to do to make it better without changing the core, but keeping things fresh.
Was it nice in a way to do something like Titanfall, to be able to
Absolutely.
cut, like, the way it happened, probably maybe not the most fun thing, but yeah, was it nice to be able to just go, oh, new idea, all those ideas that didn't fit in this box we can put over here?
Yeah, starting over sometimes is nice. It gives you the freedom to do something new.
Like I even remember when I was writing Portal 2, there were some ideas and technology in Portal 2 that they pulled out, which f-stop, which was an idea that I saw, which they asked me not to write about. But at the time, they were talking about that as something that could potentially be like an interesting mechanic for like a future, you know, Half-Life game or something. So I think there have been ideas, but again, it's all driven by gameplay at Valve. So I don't think it's like, here's, you know, the epic story we're waiting to tell. It's sort of like, well, what is the gameplay? So for sure, people have experimented with stuff, but that's not just Half-Life. It's like, well, what could they do with Left 4 Dead, or what could they do with Port? It's like they have all these kind of IPs, so I don't ever know that like, hey, here's production, you know, this team is devoted to like making the next Half-Life. I think there were obviously people working on gameplay simulations and ideas, but I don't know if it ever got to the point of like, well, here's the story of the next game. Like I remember one year at Spike VGAs, we did an honor for Half-Life, which was Half-Life 2, which was Game of the Decade, and Gabe flew down almost the entire team and honored them, and I wanted to do a thing with the G-Man to sort of show up on screen to kind of greet people or sort of remember it. And I was like, I kind of asked Valve, I'm like, hey, you know, could we get like the G-Man model or something? Oh yeah, we got this new G-Man model we're gonna send down to you. And it's like, they're like, no, we gotta like go and find it. We don't know where it is. And it's like somewhere. And it's like, it's just not like, there wasn't actively like, oh yeah, we've been working on this super high-res G-Man we're gonna use for it. It's just, it wasn't even sort of part of the conversation.
Since the release of Episode 2, the first-person genre has evolved in two main directions. The first, large-scale open-world adventures, and the second, persistent online shooters. While at one stage every FPS designer under the sun was chasing Half-Life's tail, now there simply aren't games like Half-Life anymore. The closest we've gotten to has been Respawn's work on the Titanfall series, but even that comes with an asterisk. Vince co-created Call of Duty, so he knows the score when it comes to the popularity of single-player games. When the first Titanfall was made, the studio focused on multiplayer because it took less time and money to develop, and was likely to be played a lot more. It wasn't until they actually had funding to take a real swing at single player that they designed the terrific Titanfall 2, a campaign that many have said is the best Half-Life game released in the past decade. Maybe it's the varied level design, or the terrific sci-fi moments, or the anthropomorphic robot buddy, but I think it might have something to do with the process. The original Half-Life was a collection of levels developed by disparate teams at Valve known as Cabals. It wasn't until Mark Laidlaw was hired that they were pulled together into a cohesive narrative. Similarly, Titanfall 2's campaign was the result of an internal pitch process, not unlike a game jam. Designers worked on different styles of play, and these were all brought together to make the campaign, which is how they ended up with such a varied and interesting game. In any case, I wanted to know what Vince thought about the comparison.
I mean, we are using the Half-Life engine, right? So we have the source engine at the core of what we do, so I guess there's some DNA there. I think it's got kind of a style maybe that is reminiscent of something Half-Life, right? It's also a great compliment, by the way. I take that as a huge, huge compliment. The way we kind of do it, and if you look at it on paper, it doesn't make sense, right? Like, so we have this 6-hour-ish single-player experience that you put like 75% of your money and resources into, that people either don't play or burn through as fast as they can to get to the thing that we spend 25% of our resources on, and kind of cram it in at the end when we get everything else working, all the systems working. I think we approach it a little differently now, but I think back in the Call of Duty days, it was definitely a single-player game first, and multiplayer was, you know, a part of that came later. You know, there's more variety, what you can do, because you play through a single player, it's you play through it again, it's probably pretty much the same thing, right? Multiplayer, it's a different game every time because your opponents are different, how they act, where they go, it's always different. So, and it's more social. It's just, to me, it makes more sense.
Perhaps the future of Half-Life is a virtual reality game or an open world adventure. Perhaps it's a multiplayer game. Would us fans be satisfied if they just dumped us back in Crossfire with a virtual reality gravity gun? I don't know. Maybe?
Hours of deathmatch on Crossfire with my mates, right? And then, Half-Life 2 comes out. Obviously played the hell out of that game, but then we instantly wanted to play that deathmatch and throw in toilets and, the gravity gun. It's just the funnest gun on the planet, man. I mean, oh. And you could hold, you would use one piece of debris as a shield and then throw other ones, right? Hold the file cabinet, throw the toilet. It was just crazy. And I didn't spend that much time on it. Again, by then, as soon as Counter-Strike came out, it was my go-to first-person shooter, right? Everything else was you'd dabble with it, you'd have fun with it, and then you'd go back.
Do you play much Gary's Mod at all or any of that?
A little bit, just a little bit for the wackiness of it.
That ended up being its own thing for like 10 years.
Yeah, and it's still alive and well too, right? There's still Gary Mod's craziness,
He's gone off and had a career and made Rust and all that.
Yeah.
That's the biggest problem we had when we started doing this, was that then everyone was like, oh, you need to cover this mod and this one and this one.
Because it'd be really interesting to do like a 6 degrees of separation of like Half-Life mod makers and like where they are now, right? Because again, it spawned a whole class of professionals.
Episode 2 would be the last Half-Life game Valve would work on. Portal was sort of side-loaded into the universe, and the sequel more directly referenced the work at Black Mesa, but by and large, the release of Episode 2 marked a turning point in the story of Half-Life, a new chapter where a global community of fans would begin to make this game their own. It's not that modding was something new, on the contrary, the first Half-Life was one of the most modded games of all time, spawning classics like They Hunger, USS Darkstar, Science and Industry, Natural Selection, Team Fortress Classic, and countless more. You could do an entire documentary on any one of these mods. In fact, some of these communities were so big that they'd spawned sub-communities. Counter-Strike had large groups of players playing exclusively on jump maps and surf maps.
It's kind of funny because I was thinking about this on the drive down. No offense to you as a game journalist, like I would buy the game magazines, not so much to read the game reviews, but for that disc, because that disc had all those games on it, all these new demos, man. And yeah, you might be able to download them online on your 14.4 modem or whatever, but it was just, you got this disc, it was just perfect, right? And Counter-Strike was one of those.
Yeah, 50 Half-Life mods.
Right? Every little mod, you'd be like, what is this? What is this? Natural Selection, what are all these weird different wacky games? And again, Half-Life has to have spawned the most mods of any game. That and Quake, I would imagine. Other mods, I played the hell out of Day of Defeat, for sure. Tons of Day of Defeat. Came out right after Counter-Strike as a mod. Also, a mod team that got sucked up by Valve, and then turned into a real game. Turned into a source version as well. And there's a pattern here with Valve, right? They see a really good mod, they take the team. It was just one of many mods that got dropped out of Half-Life being the most amazing game engine. These creative, they're game programmers. These mods, they weren't kids making mods. These are kids that wanted to be game developers, right?
One of these Counter-Strike modders was Robert Yang. Robert now works as a professor at NYU Game Center, where he helps educate the next generation of designers. Like many modders, he started out making Counter-Strike maps. He enjoyed the world-building part of it and telling stories through the environments he designed. The first project he worked on was the single-player mod Nightwatch, but for Half-Life fans it was the next project he collaborated on that would live in infamy.
At first, I thought the idea of Black Mesa Source was terrible and silly. I was like, why would you remake this whole thing? Then I played Half-Life 1 Source, and I thought, wow, this is really disappointing and bad. I thought I'm a big enough fan that I can like do this and contribute to this. So I decided to sign. I went to the forum, I signed up, and then that was that. Maybe things were simpler back then. You could just email someone and then get on a mod project. For Black Mesa Source, I think at that time we had about maybe like 60 people on the wiki, but maybe 20 or 30 of us were actually working on stuff. We tried to separate into departments. We kind of modeled ourselves after a AAA studio, which may or may not be the right thing from volunteer-only like modding project. But you know, we had an art department, we had a coding department, and we had like a level design department who each had their own sections in the message board. I remember each level designer, got assigned their own chapter that they were kind of in charge in. So I was in charge of anomalous materials. Someone else was in charge of Black Mesa Inbound. Daniel Unick was in charge of Blast Pit. John Paul was in charge of Lambda Core. I was pro change. I was pro renovations, pro reboot approach. Where if you play the anomalous materials section that's there, like that first big lobby room is fairly different. The flow and the way the player moves through the space is still mostly the same, and everything is still kind of in the same locations. But I thought it was really important to make a big statement by doubling the scale of it and adding more polys everywhere and just really changing kind of the approach of it to be like, yeah, this is Half-Life in the source engine. I didn't want to just do Half-Life 1 source. I felt like that was a shadow we had to like escape and run away from.
Hey, Mr. Freeman. I had a bunch of messages for you, but we had a system crash about 20 minutes ago, and I'm still trying to find my files. Just one of those days, I guess. They were also having some problems down in the test chamber, too, but I think that's all straightened out. They told me to make sure you headed down there as soon as you got into your hazard suit.
Other stuff I wanted to do, I thought the original didn't feel quite populated or crowded enough. Yeah, we had to, that was actually a problem I remember we had as level designers, environment artists. We were thinking, what would a futuristic military chemistry lab look like? And we were like, it'll have the periodic table up over here, and what else says chemistry? Okay, let's put a beaker here, and like test tables there. Yeah, that reminds me of chemistry class in high school. I'll put the test table here. Yeah, it was strange to think about. We had to extend this world building that they had started and merely gestured at in the original, where it's computer mainframes everywhere, and that doesn't make sense for a chemistry lab. The bathroom really pops out at me for some reason, because I just don't remember seeing a bathroom in a video game. Oh, there's like toilet paper there. Like there's toilet paper on the shelf. Like there's all this attention to details with something as mundane as a bathroom. And the bathroom just shows you, I think, the soul of the game a little bit. It's like, did they really care about this space? If the level designer really cared about this space, they thought about where people were gonna take a shit.
Dear Deerin, fetch me a roll of toilet paper. Hello? Hello? Oh, thank heavens. I'm in dire need of some toilet paper.
Black Mesa started out as a mod, but during its near decade-long development, eventually evolved into a single-player game of its own. In fact, it's not even done yet. Crowbar Collective recently released footage of their epic redesign of the infamous final chapter, Zen. According to the trailer, we should be able to play it in early 2019. As you can imagine, a lot of designers have come and gone on the project over the years, and creative leadership has even swapped a few times too. Robert left the Black Mesa team years ago, but remembers his time on the project fondly. Seen as Robert's job was replicating Half-Life 1 and Half-Life 2, he is one of a select group of people outside of Valve who can speak to the idiosyncratic nature of both versions of the source engine. When we talked to Jeff, he noted that many of the developers at Valve were hired by Gabe from the modding community. And according to Robert, that modding spirit is everywhere in the design of Half-Life.
When they're making Half-Life 1, they're basically modding the Quake engine and just putting all these hacks into it. So when you're coming in from Black Mesa Source on that train, and then you're standing there, and then you're like, great, is the door gonna open? And then the door doesn't open for a while, and you're like, what's going on? And then there's a level change, and you're like, why is there a level change? I'm already here. And that level change is a hack so that they can swap out that moving train for a fake static train, and then the door can move at last. I remember trying to read through the squad AI in Half-Life, and I remember AI in Half-Life cannot talk and move at the same time. Like AI in Half-Life cannot do this. They cannot do like more than 2 things at once. They have a schedule full of tasks, so they have to say something and then they can move. That's why the soldiers have to stop and hide somewhere and then reload their gun. So when Half-Life 2 comes out and like grunts can like walk and shoot at you at the same time, that's like mind-blowing. They don't actually perform as a squad. Like they're still basically independent agents that just happen to take turns like shooting at you. They're still not really centrally coordinated. So I think the grunt AI in Half-Life is this beautiful example of something seeming a lot more complicated than it actually is. Back when you're working on Half-Life 1 or Half-Life 2 era stuff, you're not really coding in a language. To script all the level logic, you have to use entities. And these entities are like icons or like visual things inside the world. So when you are scripting, okay, first Gordon Freeman will walk in here, and then that'll trigger the door, and the door will close. And then you have to trigger this sound and trigger that sound. Each of those is like an independent thing that like the level designer had to make and then manually like connect to this other thing. So what happens is that instead of getting like spaghetti code, you have like paella code or like risotto code, where it's not a long line of all these words in this programming language. It's literally just visual noise of 100 icons and trying to remember which of those icons you attach that logic to. Yeah, you have to like create the trigger and then convert that into a brush entity and then add all the information attached to it. Or there's some stuff where you're not necessarily attaching the scripting to like a wall or a door or something. You're attaching the scripting to just this random point in space as a hack. It doesn't matter where you put it, but you have to put it somewhere. So what often ends up happening is you might make like another room that the player never goes into, but that room is just where you put scripts inside it. So it's like you're making architecture for yourself that the player will never actually experience.
Right, yeah.
It's like a backstage kind of. You literally have to build a backstage for your levels.
Modding is in the blood of Half-Life, a child of Quake, which I guess makes Titanfall Quake's grandchild. This is the nature of software, ideas passed down through generations like bottles washing up on a beach. We like to think of games as these polished, curated experiences, but the reality is that they're usually a lot messier than that. Games aren't made by magicians, well, okay, Randy notwithstanding, games are made by fallible humans with fears, desires, and college debt. Many of the people who worked on Half-Life are long gone from their positions at Valve, but the community of developers around it has never lost momentum. While Twitch users dropped number 3 jokes in the livestream chat for the International, modders were still releasing new versions of Sven Co-op. This community was making Half-Life mods for the pure love of it. They didn't need encouragement to keep doing it, but they got it anyway, in the form of a blog written by Half-Life's writer. So, just as Gordon had pushed that sample into the anti-mass spectrometer and changed the world forever, Mark Laidlaw penned Epistle 3 and created a whole new wave of unforeseen consequences.
When I first played Half-Life 2, I had never before played a game with so many elaborate scripted scenes, and it sort of like made my brain explode and say, oh my god, video games can do this kind of thing. These days, I mostly appreciate it as sort of like a nostalgic trip back to my teenage years, and it can make me feel the way I felt back then when I was first discovering that video games could do these complicated things. The boat scene I loved when I first played it because I sort of didn't really expect it, you know? And also, it's very, you know, tonally interesting where you're cruising down this river and sometimes it's these action sequences and then sometimes you're like spookily exploring these shore locations.
What was it like going back to play Half-Life 1 then?
Oh, that was wild. Yeah, I was like, oh, I can see why people like this so much, but it's kind of square and weird looking because I was playing it so many years after it came out. I remember really enjoying some of the like how you could see like the Half-Life sensibilities in their sort of seed form in Half-Life 1 before they grew to like how they were in the later games. I enjoyed being able to sort of like plumb the design history of this company and see what they used to do.
2 is almost like a totally different game, but they have to like drag some of the fiction into it. So it must have been strange seeing like Dr. Kleiners everywhere.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Like, why is there 50 of him?
Yeah, retconning him to be one guy in Half-Life 2.
My goodness. Gordon Freeman. It really is you, isn't it?
So last year, Mark Laidlaw, the writer of Half-Life, made a blog post that was a gender-swapped telling of, we suppose, his pitch for the story of Half-Life 3. It's a letter about everything that happened in Half-Life 3, but also seemingly there's a lot you can read into it that seems to be about Valve. It seems to simultaneously be a story about these characters who are worn out. Worn out also by Valve. There's all these double entendres in it that are like, you know, all of my friends have left and they're all gone. They went on to other places, and you're reading it and it's just kind of heartbreaking, you know. And halfway through, I realized that I had to like make this, and then I realized, oh, I shouldn't just make it. I should make a game jam. I've been kind of addicted to game jams for a long time. There were a couple years where I was doing like 8 game jams a year because I wasn't shipping anything at my day job, and I really wanted to like complete creative projects, right? And game jams sort of allow you to do that. They give you a deadline and encourage you to complete something by it. And for a lot of people, that's the impetus that they need. You know, a lot of people could create something weird and funny and creative at any time, but they sort of need the kick to do it. One of my favorite games from the jam was a game called, I think, Epistle 3, made by Heather Flowers, which is entirely made of cubes. And because Heather hasn't actually played Half-Life 1 or Half-Life 2, it was sort of her abstract reimagining of like what these things probably mean. And you have to shoot the cubes with your gun to figure out what they are. You just walk around in these cube worlds and you shoot things to figure out like what they are, and they talk back to you and be like, I'm Alex, don't shoot me. I love that one. That one's great. Brendan Chung made a version using entirely assets and sound clips from Half-Life 2 called Tiger Team. That one's brilliant. Rachel Sala just made a worm that you wiggle your mouse and it spits out Dr. Breen voice lines and its eyes flash. I made an entirely text game that technically has MMO elements, where every time you choose whether or not to kill Dr. Breen, it keeps track of how many people have done that, and then it tells you how many people in the world have killed Dr. Breen, and decides whether he's dead or alive based on that statistic. There's a guy who works under the name Dave Makes, who made this bizarre sort of, it's just a hallway. You just go down the hallway and you wave your mouse wildly to kill head crabs, and then all the characters from Half-Life show up, but they can't get your name right, and you can't get their names right, and you're just wandering down this hallway in a fever dream. There's so many bizarre takes on this story. And I think part of the reason there's so many bizarre takes on the story is because the story itself is very, very, very strange.
Right.
Like it's much darker than Half-Life 2 or any of the Half-Life 2 episodes. It's got some really disturbing stuff about what happens to Dr. Breen in it. He shows up as a grub with Dr. Breen's face stapled onto the front of it. And Gordon has a very bad time in that synopsis. At the end, he gets like snapped into the Combine's universe while on the Borealis, and the Borealis is like traveling through space. And then the G-Man is like, goodbye, and just leaves him there. And then it's the end of the game.
And Alex ends up being like far more important to G-Man, right?
Yeah, G-Man says, Alex is my best friend now. Friendship ended with Gordon, goodbye, and leaves him there. I loved that this sort of unlocked everybody's ability to take ownership of Half-Life in a way, rather than, like, I know that some people did in fact try to make, you know, what I think Half-Life 3 should have been, but I think a lot more people were just like, what if I could just take over the Half-Life IP and do whatever I wanted with it? This is what I would do. This is how I would express myself using Half-Life as a tool. And I thought that was brilliant, because that is sort of what Half-Life 3 has become to a lot of people. It's just sort of a phantasm that haunts us.
It seems that the posting of Laidlaw's blog and the decade-long silence from Valve has almost handed full creative ownership of the franchise over to its fans. Here's another thing. Valve has a terrific in-house documentary team, a talented crew who frequently make videos about Dota, including the wonderful documentary Free to Play. But when the 20th anniversary came and went, we heard nothing from Valve. And it wasn't a surprise. The only reason we set off on this journey was to do what needed to be done, to allow Half-Life fans the chance to revel in their nostalgia for a while, and to try and figure out why it was that we're all still obsessed with this game 2 decades later. I still don't have my answer, but it does feel like we're getting closer. We had one more interview left on the schedule, and unlike all the others, this one wasn't looking back. It was looking to the future. The Game Jam was a cathartic, creative exercise, but there was always going to be someone who attempted to finish what Valve had started. One such group called themselves Project Borealis, an international team of programmers, designers, and artists that are currently in production on their vision for Half-Life Episode 3. When I reached out to the team, it turned out the two of them were pretty close by. Project manager Mike Dunaway and concept artist Mike Yakovlov lived about an hour away from my home here in Maryland. It also turned out that 3D artist Ben Lodge was visiting the guys all the way from Minneapolis. So I invited them over, crammed all three of them onto a couch in my basement, and had a chat about bringing back Gordon Freeman.
You know, we have a lot of people, we've got people who work for Google who work for us on the programming side of things. We've got a lot of, people like Mike here who are freelance artists working on the team. The guy that's sort of our lead sound designer, he's a PhD student basically. He's a doctor, and we've got another really talented programmer who also is a doctor. I don't know what's with doctors and having like second professions, which are just as good as their first professions, but people who are sort of senior roles and technical leaders in the games industry as well. Off the top of my head, I know there's some that work at Ubisoft, Blizzard. I was at Obsidian Entertainment. Yeah, I mean, again, my skills transfer over. They actually started in the industry and now they're outside of the industry. But I just build cannabis dispensaries.
It's a growing market as well.
It's a very growing. It's kind of
no
funny.
pun intended.
Yeah, well.
One important decision the team made early on was to build the game in the Unreal Engine. They did this for a number of reasons. First of all, as we heard from Robert, working in Source can be incredibly complex, especially for a distributed team. And though they wanted it to feel like Half-Life, they also wanted it to look like a modern game. Using Source would be an easy way to retain the feel of those older games, but it would put a 10-year-old cap on the quality of the visuals, whereas with Unreal, they could make it look like a modern Half-Life game. So they got to work attempting to recreate the look and feel of those original games.
We're always kind of trying to pull ourselves back, rein ourselves back into, what is fun to think about as a potential for Half-Life, in a universe, and what really makes sense within that episodic sort of, this is just immediately after episode 2. There's no giant leaps in technology or changing of designs there.
Yeah, it's literally immediately afterward. We pick up, right there, right at the end of episode 2. So you can't just all of a sudden have everybody looks different. Yeah. It doesn't make any sense. Like, we have this template. We have Half-Life 2 to sort of base everything on. And so that's kind of the linchpin of every creative decision we have to try and make. Because we're not creating Half-Life 3. We're creating Half-Life 2 Episode 3. So it still needs to feel like Half-Life 2 at its core.
A large part of the initial, we'll say 6 months of our development, beyond just structuring the team, was just researching and sort of reverse engineering, what made Half-Life 2 feel like Half-Life 2, down to the things that we wouldn't even do in modern day gameplay design and development, like how you stick to ladders and how you move up and down ladders, how you back hopping, right, and bunny hopping. We actually put in things that are essentially quirks from Half-Life 2, Source Engine. We put those into Unreal because we wanted someone to be able to sit down and say, hey, can I do this one weird thing, that I used to do in Source? Oh, I can, Very, very minute things like that, crouch jumping. We even had at one point, we had prop surfing, working in the game. But we actually had to take that one out because it was a little bit too game breaking for Unreal. there's a lot of things about original Half-Life 2 weapons that don't make any sense. But the SMG doesn't have a grenade launcher, but it shoots grenades. So one of the questions that Ben and Yakov were talking about early on was, do we add a grenade launcher to make it more sense? And
my response was no, because that's Half-Life 2, baby.
Yeah, that's how it is.
They made a lot of weird decisions like that, and whether we agree with them or not, for like a modern next-gen game, we're not making a modern next-gen game in some regards. We're making a modern interpretation of an old game.
Right.
Yeah. So we need to sort of leave some of that silliness and that quirkiness in there sometimes. The guy who's modeling all of our weapons, he goes through and he'll pull out the source models and go, okay, how can I interpret this to make it look good? Because the originals are very low poly, and they're only really made to be seen from the view that you see them from. Whereas we don't have a difference between a world model and a view model. So everything's got to look good, and it needs to look good from all angles. So going through, and it's like, okay, this is just a bunch of black rectangles mashed together. That's all Valve did. And trying to interpret that and then add detail to it. You see it from this view, and it's just, there's some stuff that are like projected on there that if you look at it from the side, it's all stretched because you're made to be seeing it from this view. And then you look at the world model that you see in like third person, and you compare it with the first person model. They're totally different. How do you figure out what's going on there? And it ends up being like, we'll troll through Google and end up trying, this is the label that they used for this part. I found it.
Yeah.
You sort of puzzle this thing together, and then you end up with something that looks, it feels like the original, but looks current gen and more detailed and involved.
We released, I forget which update it was, but it showed like our first weapon animations. We made one change to the animation where in Half-Life 2, Gordon holds a handgun with one hand, which if you've ever shot a pistol, that does not work. You'll recoil all the time. So our animator's like, okay, I'm gonna have him grip it with two hands. That makes sense. And oh my god, everyone was like, that's not how it is in the game. You gotta go back to one hand. So we kind of went back and forth on that for a while, and eventually we're like, okay, we'll go back to how it was, where he's just holding it in one hand. But very minute stuff like that. If we don't catch it, the community will catch it when we release the update. And so it's a nice kind of feedback loop for some of that stuff to get it exactly right.
And you guys are receptive to that? Like that type of criticism? You don't...
I think we're receptive to that because, again, it goes back to, it's not Half-Life 3, it's Episode 3, right? Yeah. Gordon doesn't suddenly decide to hold a gun differently from one episode to the next. He doesn't see Eli die and then suddenly he's like, I gotta hold the gun like this. It doesn't make any sense like
Business
that.
Time.
Each of the episodes added their own flavor. Episode 1 focused on you playing alongside Alex. Episode 2 introduced a new enemy and had larger areas that you could cross in your buggy. The fresh Arctic environment was sure to give the team some sort of creative license to add their own flavor to the series. So how about a remix of an old favorite?
I think it was in the script. I think that was what first inspired it. The idea of like an Arctic version of a head crab, because it was like some of these characters are going to be in the Arctic. Head crab is pretty bald, like it's just skin. We started playing around with like how would they look if they froze, like maybe they would just be frozen in the snow and then you can like break them. But then something I think came up. I was like, well, what if we kind of modify it to be like a polar bear in some sense? So like the skin is dark like a polar bear skin. It's got like matted, gross, like yellowish white fur on the top, and it's like adding just fur on it or adding just hair on it would be enough that it still is an iconic thing. It still has the same like silhouette, the same shape, but it just sets it in that environment perfectly. So I just kind of quickly sketched up this like little photo bash of a head crab with he's got like crab, like the front claws are a little bit more crab-like. They have that texture. The skin's a little bit darker, and the fur is a little bit more like gross and matted, like blood on it and stuff like that. And then when it got put in the update, like it didn't get like, I mean, I wasn't expecting it to get any like negative reaction, but it didn't get like any negative, like almost none.
I mean, it's pretty clear that like, in comparison to all the other Zen Life that is in the Half-Life universe, the head crab is something that like is changing, like, or at least in Half-Life 2, there's multiple variations of head crabs, right? So we took it a step further and we're like, well, if anything is going to be changed in the Arctic, it would be the head crab, because it's this like bald little thing, and does it really survive in these like harsh temperatures? So we're like, well, yeah, if we're to use head crabs as a, if they're still weaponizing head crabs, the Combine, then they're going to want to make it in an environment that can, resist the cold.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's what we have it in our internal sort of lore that they've done experiments, and that's how they've sort of evolved these head crabs into the hairy, furry version of themselves. And with that comes some different variants in how they play, because each head crab variant has a different sort of zombie variant that goes with it, and affects Gordon in a different way, and so we've kind of played around with that while still trying to keep it within the sense of what makes sense, and nothing that's truly too far out there.
During the first 12 months, they built their source-mimicked engine and focused on establishing their distributed workflow. The team is taking the project slow and steady and plans to work on Project Borealis for a number of years. The next phase involves creating assets and building out a public A/B test tech demo set in a snowy version of Ravenholm. The road ahead is long, but their hope is that all their hard work will result in something very special for fans.
There's a lot of self-inflicted pressure, we inflict our own pressure on ourselves, because ultimately we don't want to be another Valve, in the sense that we become this project that, okay, now this is the episode 3 project, and suddenly people transfer their expectations of what they wanted Valve to do to us, and we're doing this as a volunteer. So I think there's certainly, for me at least, there's some pressure there.
We all are here because we're passionate about Half-Life, and we're passionate about making a cool and exciting and fun Half-Life experience. I would want people to understand that we're not just trying to cash in on some trend or anything like that. We're doing this because we care about it, and we're going to put as much care and effort into it as we can. And some of us are reordering our entire lives, or taking different shifts at work so that we can have more time to do game dev stuff, even though work is paying money and this is not. We want to be here doing this.
Why do you think you have that passion? Like, why reorder your lives, and why do it?
I think for a lot of us, it's the impact that Half-Life 2 had on our younger years. I'm 30. Half-Life 2 came out when I was in high school, and just watching not only Half-Life series grow and change and stagnate, over time, but watching Valve grow and change, and kind of just feeling like, this isn't just, I haven't really just been involved in Half-Life for a year. I've been involved in Half-Life for over a decade.
Is that what this is all about? Closure. The fact that 11 years ago our favourite game ended on a cliffhanger. That seems to be the prevailing thought of Half-Life fans around the world, but after talking to all these people, I'm not so sure anymore. This community is like nothing else in the world of video games. It not only supports some of the biggest fan projects in the industry, but online groups like Lambda Generation, news channels like Valve News Network, and dozens of mods that are still being played actively right now, 20 years after the launch of the game. So you know what I think this is all about? Inspiration.
On our travels, we met a lot of people, a lot of different people of different ages and professions, but each of them in some way, at some point in their lives, was inspired by Half-Life to go out there and create something.
A mod, a game jam, a website to help fans watch their favorite game, a new method of reporting on games, or an entire company.
And perhaps the most peculiar part of all of this, at least for me, is that in trying to find that answer, I'd effectively stumbled into the exact same creative process as those people. When Valve didn't get back to us, there's no reason why I didn't just go and do a documentary about a different game. There's no shortage of games for us to do work on. But there's something about Half-Life that just inspires people to create work around it. And I get it for the programmers. The lineage of modding that exists in this game's DNA has inspired loads of people who wanted to work in game design. But I'm bad at programming. I'm not good at that stuff. What I do is video, and even still, somehow it managed to inspire me to go out and make something. And the more I think about it, and the more I sort of analyze Valve's peculiar decade-long radio silence, the more I think that the fact that they aren't really taking active ownership over Half-Life, and the fact that they haven't talked about Episode 3, it's kind of a gift.
The creative vacuum left by Episode 3 has kept this community alive, and with time, allowed the fans to take ownership of the game, and to continue to create beautiful new pieces of art, born from a love of Half-Life, but new, different, exciting, and transformative.
I'm satisfied with the games that we've gotten since Half-Life 2 Episode 2. Like, most of the Assassin's Creed games have come out since then. Dead Space came out, Dark Souls came out. Like, there's plenty of games that have been around for over a decade now that were rich experiences in my life. I don't need Half-Life 3. You know, it doesn't hurt me for there to be no Half-Life 3.
Would you be disappointed if it came out in a way?
Maybe, yeah, because now I've put all this energy into making my own Half-Life 3. Now the IP holders are gonna, what if they make something I'd feel like mine had been stomped on? I don't know. The one thing I was very worried about when I started the jam was that people were going to make games slamming Valve for not making Half-Life 3.
Right.
And I really didn't like that idea because, like I said, I feel fine that I haven't played Half-Life 3. I've gotten to play plenty of wonderful games. I don't need Half-Life 3. But those people wanted to make Half-Life 3 and they were stopped for whatever reason, for company reasons or finance reasons or internal politics reasons. They wanted to make Half-Life 3 and they couldn't. And I don't think it's right for us to harass them for not making it. They probably wanted to make it really bad, you know? And I was worried that people were going to make games that were bitter or angry or negative, and I'm very glad that people didn't.
It is true that digital interactive entertainment is not merely the newest medium our species has created, but the first time our species has been able to create a medium where the audiences we're entertaining are affecting the experience. They're participating. It is interactive by definition. And we are at the very dawn of that. And I don't think the world will be the same. And I don't think the human experience will be the same. But we are just at the beginning of that, and we're just figuring it out. And we got to be here.
Are we at a point where it's hard to come up with new ground to stomp on in first person?
I think you're always thinking that it's hard to come up with something new, right? But then someone will think of it or find it, and we'll all go, "Oh my God, how did we not think of that?" Right. Yeah, I guess my kids have probably never played Half-Life. I know they've played Portal and things like that, but
right.
I don't know that they've ever played Half-Life.
What's it like?
I'm gonna have to go home and fix that tonight.
I think I'm on the side of maybe it's okay if there's never a Half-Life 3. Maybe the absence of Half-Life 3 is more important than what it could ever actually be.
Right.
Because in the end, it'll just be this first-person shooter in an age where we don't really play single-player first-person shooters anymore. Like, if Half-Life 3 came out, would it be an open-world game now? Because that's kind of what the FPS was. That's our modern equivalent of the FPS culturally, right? Will it be on our phone? Because that's what'll appeal to today's audience, right? We'll have microtransactions. Will they sell season passes? It's just
100 Gordon Freemans drop onto an island.
Yeah, 100 Gordon Freemans from like a giant manta ray or something, right? Like, what would? It's really difficult to imagine how current industry conditions would change what Half-Life 3 is, because the industry is so different from 2004 or 1998.
It's a huge part of sort of my story and the legacy of covering that company and that game. I think we all hope that they're going to make new great things, and whether those are Half-Life branded or not, I think we just want more games from Valve. But look, now that Campo Santo's there, they're doing the Valley of Gods, which I'm really excited about. Whether it's branded Half-Life or not, I think we just want those magic moments again. But, you know, a lot of people that made those games have gone off and done other things, and it's, you know, something new. And Portal was a great example of Valve bringing in new talent to, you know, work with them to come up with something new. So that's why I'm excited about Campo Santo, because the Valley of Gods, that trailer looks incredible. And from what I've heard, that game is only getting sort of bigger in scope now that it's inside of Valve. So, you know, that's the one I think, to me, you know, could that be the next Half-Life level sort of experience coming from Valve? We'll see.
Maybe the G-Man will wake up Gordon once again. There'll always be a part of me that hopes that one day that will come true.
But no matter what Valve does or doesn't do, the legacy of this game will continue to radiate from that blast chamber in Black Mesa. The world of first-person games was changed forever, and so too were the lives of fans and creators all around the world.
The more time moves on, the fewer of us there'll be that remember how important Half-Life was, and its influence will exponentially decay. But no matter how small it gets, I'd like to think, at least, that it'll always be there.
The fact that Half-Life 3 is not going to happen means that we can pretend that it belongs to us now. You know, like, we put in, as a group of people, more effort into imagining what it might have been, I suppose, than the limited number of humans at Valve were able to do even in 10 years. You know, even if they did it all day long, there's millions of us out here imagining what it could have or should have been like. And the fact that we're pretty sure it's not going to happen now, I think, has given people freedom to make their wishes real, I guess.
Alright, I'm gonna go play a different game, I think. I shall return.